The 11 Bang Bang Reload Show starts now.
You forgot to unmute your mic here.
There we are. Hello, everybody
you
out
boys
there.
are getting fancy on this thing. Who the heck was narrating it?
That would have been a friend of ours, kind of close to like my sister. But anyway, once again, everybody, welcome to the 11 Bang Bang Reload Show. Kind of messed up there a little bit. Tonight we have an extra special guest, extra special show. We're talking all Colts for 2 hours. We're going to go through everything from 1836 to 1860. We got a big pile of books here at my feet, and Duke's got a big pile of books in his head. So let me introduce our guest. This is Duke Fraizer over here. Duke Fraizer Productions. He is the man with the leather and the king of Colt, and I want you all to make him feel welcome tonight. You got questions? Go ahead and put them up. We will be stopping periodically, and Ethan will be popping in to read your questions, and we will move on from there. We have a lot of people in the chat already. Snapper's in here. I have Ethan attempting to make you a moderator, Snapper. We'll see if that gets done. And we have James Stutzman and Landon and Angelica. Hi. And looks like we got about 3 people in here. So anyway, shall we get started here? Where would you start with Colts? Would you start with the Patterson or the Collier, Duke? Collier.
The collar. If you want to get like specific on Colt, start with the Patterson. But Colt pretty much said he didn't invent the revolver; he just perfected it.
Yeah,
it was already there and in place.
Yeah, I believe Haven Belden talks about going through the Tower of London and seeing all the different revolving flintlocks, and there was a large amount of revolving flintlocks already out on the market.
Oh yeah,
more than just one.
Because technically the Puckle gun is a revolver, but it's also technically the first belt-fed military arm. And then you had the Collier. There's a couple others there that I can't remember the names of. Me and names don't get along most of the time anyway, but the revolvers were out there. They were definitely out there. Cat, you're gonna have to move.
I've seen even some pictures of some revolving rifles that were already out there. They were flintlocks, of course, but it would have been a kind of an iffy thing, I would think.
Right, and there was others. They had that one rifle. I can't remember who made it, but it revolved. But the thing was that it revolved instead of around the pin this way. If I can get in front of the camera, it revolves this way. So you ever had chain fire, you always had bullets coming back at you.
Yeah, I know that the harmonica was what they called the one that went side by side, but I don't remember what they called. I know what you're talking about, the turret.
Right.
And it had a turret.
Yeah, basically, it's a turret. I don't think that one was very successful.
Yeah, could you imagine a chain fire? That would just be a nightmare. Every direction. But anyway, yeah, so we started out, and I can have my guy hand me not mine, his. This is, we're going to go with airsoft tonight, guys. There's going to be a lot of them because we got to discuss what we're talking about here. This is Duke's favorite Pieta. Now tell us, Duke, why you think these Pietas the Pieta replica is not that great of a firearm.
Well, there's a saying that Sam Colt hand-tuned every single Patterson that was ever made. That it comes down to is the Italians, they know how to make a good gun. They just don't know how to tune a Patterson. They can't tune a Patterson. There ain't one that they can tune right. So yeah, they don't tune them. Otherwise, they'd be good guns. I shot mine. I got 15 rounds before I got fed up and decided I wasn't going to shoot it anymore. I got 15 rounds out of it. For accuracy, it was doing pretty decent. The reason why that video never went live is because I was so ticked off after those 15 rounds and that gun broke that there wasn't a decent word I could use in front of decent Christian folk in it. So I got it home, I wound up tuning it. I got it to where it was working fairly decent, but I just didn't want to mess with breaking apart and having to go through that again. But I wish Uberti made the good ones. Those were tuned right. And if Pieta would take a little more time and tune them better, they'd be good reproductions. But as they are, they're an $800 wall hanger.
More than that now. More like getting up to $1,200. But as you can see on this one, you can see them cylinder rings. And Caleb has this one tuned, but it took a long time and a lot of work to do it. And it's in time, but man, it really, the first few times we just cocked the hammer, it just tore the living daylights out of that cylinder because it was not in time at all.
The bolt, where the bolt rides the cam, being it's dragging on cylinder, that means it's probably not set right. So your bolt's not dropping all the way down before it goes to half cock to turn. But
I
that's
think
not a big deal.
He had to flatten the top of the cam a little bit to get it where it's going. But historically, in my opinion, these guns were probably a lot better than this because people seem to like them.
Oh, I guarantee it. There's guys that shoot the original still to I shouldn't say there's a lot of guys. There are a few that I know of that do shoot original Pattersons. And for being 200 years, almost 200 years old, they're doing pretty good to be able to still function and be around that long. The one problem with them, and that was a failing back then, and it's still a failing to this day, because one thing I'll give Pieta and Uberti credit for is they make the parts to original specs. The parts are fragile. They break. It don't take much. The Ubertis are notorious for breaking mainsprings.
I've never even held a Uberti, so Patterson, so I wouldn't know, but you seem to like them.
I really like mine, and it's become a safe queen just because I don't want anything bad to happen to that gun. Finish wise, that gun's beat all to hell. It's been used for living history purposes. But I shot again 15 rounds through it, and I stopped shooting not because the gun wasn't functioning, but because I didn't want to break that gun. I didn't want anything to go wrong with it. So I put it back in the safe, and that's where she stays. I take her out every once in a while and, kind of stroke it and make sure she ain't rusted up. And but, that's my baby. I paid $400 for that, and I got a really good deal. Whereas like I said, I paid $600 at the time for that Patterson or that Pieta Patterson. It's a piece of junk.
Yeah, you can get them in time, but with the extra long barrel, of course, this is the number 5. Correct me if I'm wrong. Right?
Yep.
One thing I have not found, and I've got a lot of books on the subject, but mostly all of them that Duke has suggested to me, but I have not found anything that describes why that grip is the shape it is and why they changed it. Because there's not a lot of...
Oh, go ahead, Garrett. Sorry.
It's not a lot of spring work in there that's that angle or anything. I don't know why, because this is not a Navy grip.
It was flared on the ends to kind of help keep the gun in the palm. If you look at the earlier Pattersons, they're pretty much a straight grip. They're just a straight grip on them. But Colt flared to number 5 so that it could be gripped in the hand better. But the angle of the grip, I think he was trying to replicate, what was common, the single shot pistols at the time. It's not 100% accurate to them, but it's closer.
Okay, so I never thought of that. So what you're saying is, let me bring him in. So he's with this hump in the back of this grip, he's trying to replicate this round grip.
Yep.
Okay, I never thought of that. That's actually, and you got that from a book, or is that just what you're thinking?
That's my thinking. I would have to find something to back that up, but Colt was trying to design it to be comfortable to shoot, and he thought a lot of things out on them.
The grip is very comfortable, in my opinion.
But if you look at some of the pictures of some of those earlier Pattersons, man, especially them prototypes, they got some weird grips on them.
Oh, yeah. There's extra short grips.
And then, like the first and second and third models are just, short, and they're just like a broom handle grip. But that number 5, it was designed more for fighting style. And, I always thought the little bulbs on the bottom of that swell on that grip would be a pain to shoot. But actually with me, it gives me a little bit better, for me anyway, it seems like it gives me a little better control on being able to handle that. Bangs, it ain't got a trigger guard that'll lever off of when you're cocking.
And you're talking about this swell right here, this width swell right here.
No, I'm talking about the 2 little, and yours don't have it as pronounced, but there's 2 little flanges that come off the front and the back of that grip. Yeah, just like that bell shape. That I think it helps to hang on to that gun a little better in my mind. But Colt kept that bell design, because if you look at the later ones, it doesn't have that real pronounced bell shape, but it widens out at the bottom.
Yeah, give me that Walker that's made to specs, please. That's not it. That's it. Let's see if it's, because this is a 2nd generation Colt Walker. This is the Black Box series, and it has quite a bit of a little, and it's made to, this is made to specs to the original, and it has a little bit of that swell, if you can see it.
Yeah, and see on the Pattersons, and if you look at some of them, I mean, it's got a real defined swell. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but it's very characteristic. You can identify that as a Patterson just by looking at the grip.
Yeah, and of course this hump here in the back is completely different, and the grip is shorter than the Navy grip, I think.
A little bit shorter, yeah.
But okay, let's talk about of course when he's Samuel Colt, Cult, Dr. Samuel Colt, traveling the world. From Calcutta. Okay, when he designs this gun, it's not the revolver, to the best of my understanding, that he designs about it. It's the locking system and the indexing and locking system.
Yeah, and it does not.
I've heard a lot of things about this for years and years. Anybody that watched Tales of the Gun thought, well, he saw the wheel of the ship turning and it just gave him this idea to have a cylinder. But I think it's the mechanism that locks it per degree. What do you think that he saw?
Yeah, it was totally the locking system. Because if you look at the Colt patent, it's the locking system that is patented there. And also with the single barrel with the rotating cylinder. Because he couldn't patent the rotating because of the double action. God, it's escaping my mind now. The Derringers. Pepper boxes. That's what I'm looking for. The pepper boxes. They were rotating basically barrels. Yeah, right there you go. But the lock system, that's what Colt really patented, because once that patent expires in 18, you might have to help me out here on this one.
58. Or no, 48. Because it goes to 57.
Well, no, he got the patent renewed after 48, and then for the lock work. Anyway, once that patent expires, once you see people start copying Colts making revolvers, the one thing that they copy that is common is that locking mechanism.
Even Remington copied it.
Yeah. Look, everybody, even your double action revolvers of today, they still have that mechanism. You have a hand that rotates the cylinder and a bolt that locks it in place, and it's all done by the action of cocking the hammer.
Yes, and I'm thinking that the patent would have expired in 47 when he first started making the walkers, late 47, early 48. And well, he went and asked for it might have been a little later, because he asked for 7 years. I know that much, and it didn't go out till 56 or 57.
Right, yeah, because he did have it renewed. So depending, and I don't remember if he patented that or redid the patent in 47. It's been a long time since I've read it. I'm having a hard time remembering, but I do know that he pretty much had the monopoly on the revolver market through the early 1850s because of that locking system. And once that patent was expired, everybody was using that locking system.
And Smith & Wesson were born.
Yep.
Okay, Smith & Wesson had a few guns trying to be put out in the market in 52 and 53, and they ran into that brick wall called Colt's patent, like you're talking, and that put them way back, which was fine because that actually put them back to starting in the cartridge era.
And if it hadn't have, we might not have got the Winchester rifle either. So
that's true. That is true. It all works together. And
Yep.
The thing about patents is it forces people to work their way around them. And sometimes when people are working their way around the patent, they come up with something that's even better. Like you just said, Smith & Wesson had to quit working on revolvers and started making volcanic repeaters, which turned into the Henry, which turned into the Winchester rifle.
Right.
So,
and it promotes innovation.
Mm-hmm. You think it wouldn't, but it does, because nobody's making the exact same thing.
Right.
Anyway, moving along, we got Colt out there selling laughing gas as Dr. C-U-L-T Colt from Calcutta. Okay, and this is where you're going to have to help me out here, because I know about the gunsmith he has making this gun is Pearson, but there's another one, and his name starts with an A, and I can't remember it off the top of my head. I know Pearson is the one he had the trouble with.
Belden, very early in Belden. It's funny as I can't remember the names, but I can remember about where they're at in the book. Yeah. Well, because his dad was Colt's dad was the one that financed the first venture, which was a handgun and a rifle. The handgun exploded because it had your revolver system with a couple of shields. It had a shield for the front and a shield for the back of the cylinder, which created the perfect chain firing mechanism. Right there in the book. Yep.
See, the front of the cylinder is completely covered up. The idea is you can put your hand in front of it and it won't spark your hand, but at the same time blows all the sparks back in the other cylinders.
Yeah, so the handgun blew up on the first shot. The rifle did not blow up, but after that, Colt's dad told him that he wasn't going to finance anything, so that's why he went selling laughing gas, so that he could have a gunsmith build him more prototypes.
And he had two of them, but one of them I know his name was Pearson, and I can't think of the other one. But Pearson's the one that he wrote the famous letter. We're out of rent. We're out of coal. I'm freezing to death. Send me some money. P.S. Send me some money. And years later.
His early years were definitely not that enjoyable.
No. Well, he wasn't having a bad time. He was out on the road selling laughing gas. He wasn't sitting up there in Connecticut freezing to death, or New York, I guess.
And one thing I got to say about Colt is that he didn't let a setback get him down, because even after the patent firearms company, the Patterson factory, after he was pretty much pushed out, he went to making underwater telegraph lines and sea mines.
Mm-hmm.
And he laid the first underwater telegraph line across New York Harbor
with the help of Samuel Morse.
Yep. And demonstrated the first sea mine that successfully sunk a ship in New York Harbor.
Well, if you believe the legends, he'd been doing that ever since he was a little kid.
Right.
Because supposedly at a 4th of July bash, he set a raft out on the water when he was... This is the way the story goes. I don't know how much of it is true. He set the raft out on the water and had a 4th of July party, blew the raft up, covered the people in mud, who got angry and supposedly chased him to this guy who was a little older than him's house, young man, where he hid, and supposedly that young man was Elijah K. Root. So I've just heard that. I've actually read that there is a book that predates Haven and Belden that they correct a lot. That is, I believe the book is called Armsmere, is it not? It's got a lot of fantasies in it, but it was written by Elizabeth Jarvis as true. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, I know what you talk about now.
Yeah. Oh God, it's been so long since I read that one too.
I believe the book's called Armsmere, just like the estate. And
yeah,
there's a lot of stories like that in there.
But that sometimes when it's like they say in that one movie, God, I just lost it. With John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart. Man has shot Liberty Valance. Yeah. When the fact becomes legend, print the legend.
Exactly.
Or no, when the legend becomes fact, print the legend.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on, we know that, and I'm not trying to lead this whole thing, but we know where Colt winds up making around. Now, I say 5,000 guns. You say considerably more than 5,000 guns. You think? I'm just
on
going
the
with,
Patterson.
Yeah, I'm talking about shotguns, rifles, and pistols. I'm going with what the book says, but you think there's more, right?
And the thing of it is there's no records to back it up. So this is just my personal feelings. And it could be that, you know, there were only that many. It's just a lot of them wound up out in the West. But if you look at the amount of surviving pieces and compare that to other models, amount of surviving pieces there, the proportions don't add up to the total number produced versus the amount that are still surviving to this day.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was probably some more that were out there. Pattersons are documented fairly heavily out in the West. The earliest documentation that I can remember off the top of my head was Josiah Gregg, who was a trader on his way to Santa Fe. And it was either 1837 or 1838, maybe as late as 1839. But he talks about on that trip that him and his brother both had a Colt repeating rifle and each had a pair of Colt repeating pistols. And they said they don't know. And they had spare cylinders for each gun. And they talk about having the most firepower on their persons loaded, ready to go than anybody else on the plains. And what do? Shoot prairie dogs all day.
Well, could you imagine the cost of outfitting two people with not only a rifle, but two pistols at the time? That would have been today. That would have been
25 to 150 each. The pistols are 25 to 40 each, depending on what model they were and where they bought them at. So to say that Josiah Gregg had means, that man did have means. He had money, obviously. Like I said, he was a trader on his way to Santa Fe. So you made lots of money if you were doing the trade then. Yeah, and like I said, they had the most firepower on the plains at that time. There's trappers that talk about them. There's one story that aired in True West magazine, and I found out that is kind of bogus because they're putting two different events together. But they talk about Kit Carson's trappers having Pattersons, each of them carrying a pair of Pattersons. Talk about Kit Carson getting presented a pair of Pattersons, which I found out later is no, he was not presented Pattersons. He was presented 51 Navies. Because that happened in the 1850s, that event.
That would make more
but anyway,
sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of documentation. The Texas Rangers are the other one. The Rangers had a lot of them. And those that weren't issued when Sam Houston dismantled the Texas Navy, the Rangers wound up getting the 200 Pattersons, which are the 9-inch, like what you just had there. That one there, that's what the Texas Navy had, along with some of the rifles, but the pistols went to the Rangers. And each had a spare cylinder. If you haven't heard that story, basically the Rangers used that against the Comanches that summer. You have the Battle of Walker Creek, where 15 Rangers take on 80 Comanche and kill over half of and wound over half of the Comanches. They all are carrying spare cylinders. Which is probably the only way they was able to fend off that many is because they had so many bullets. And they talk about at the end of that, Jack Hayes saying, has anybody got their rifle loaded? Because everybody was out of bullets, and loading those Pattersons is not an easy task. And one of the Rangers had his rifle loaded, so he shoots the Comanche chief, and that's the only thing that ends that battle. That's the only reason those Rangers left that battle alive.
I wonder if it was a rifle or a smoothbore.
He talks about a rifle, and you see a lot of the Rangers talk about the guys down in Texas like things a lot fancier. So you're probably not going to be finding too many of your Northwest trade guns down in Texas. The Rangers are mostly going to be carrying rifles. You see a lot of reference to half-stock rifles. I've seen reference to a couple half-stock flintlocks. which they're not rare, but they're not common.
References I've seen to double barrel flintlock shotgun style. Definitely Travis at the Alamo and a few other people were carrying those, which that'd be what I'd want.
Right. And the Rangers did carry a lot of shotguns. That shotgun became very popular by the time you get into the Mexican War. There's supposedly a picture out there of Captain Jack Hayes and a couple other Rangers, and each one of them has a double barrel shotgun, and 10, 12 gauge was the preferred gun that the Rangers used. But in the early days, a lot of the guys used rifles because depending on where you're at in Texas, and when I say Texas, you could almost, about like saying Europe, you get lots of different environments in a not small area. On the east, you got a lot of woodlands. You start getting out in the west, you get canyons, some mountain lands. You get more to the north, you start getting into more flat prairie. I mean, Texas is a big area, but a lot of where they are battling at, it's more open, longer shots. And then, of course, by the Mexican War, that's all getting into close quarters combat. So that's where you start to see the Rangers swap to shotguns. A lot of references about use of shotguns.
Yeah. And then there's the Battle of Plum Creek, which I just studied a little bit about.
Which Plum Creek,
that's a horseback fight, as far as I can tell, right?
Yeah, that one predates them getting the Pattersons. If I remember right, or no, I'm thinking of Bandera Pass. Excuse me, because Jack Hayes had a couple Pattersons, and they talk about him having them at Bandera Pass, which was the year before the Battle of Walker Creek.
The Comanches and the Tonkawas run into these Pattersons in 4 major battles that I can think of. There's probably a lot more, but you got Walker Creek, Plum Creek, Enchanted Rock, and the one you just mentioned. Right.
Yeah, Bandera Pass.
Bandera Pass, yeah.
For some reason, I'm thinking Plum Creek. That wasn't Jack Hayes. That was Bigfoot Wallace.
Yeah. And that was where they mounted up, and they were out of rifle ammunition or weren't loaded. And he just said, "All right, boys, powder burn them." And they rode right up with the Pattersons and blew them off the horses, supposedly at close range.
The reason why I was thinking that would predate the Pattersons because I thought that was 1838 that one took place.
Very well could have been.
I may be wrong on that one. It wouldn't be the first time.
You're probably right. I've just seen a few things, read a little bit.
There could have been more than one battle at Plum Creek, too.
Well, we got to get to the 1860, and I just realized we've spent almost 30 minutes on the Patterson.
Oh, we've been going for 30 minutes? Holy Moses.
Yeah. But anyway, the Patterson did not die off like a lot of people think at the beginning of the Mexican-American War. This thing wrote into history, and if you had one, you definitely weren't going to get a Walker, and Dragoons were expensive, so they hung on to them as long as they could.
And during the Mexican War early days, the Army bought up a lot of Pattersons, rifle, shotguns, revolvers, pistols. Sam Walker in the early days was a Texas Mounted Volunteer, and he was down near where Brownsville, Texas is now, Palo Alto battlefield. And they talk about losing quite a few Pattersons in the Rio Grande River.
Yeah. Well, I'm about to bring Ethan in here, and we'll go to some questions here for just a second before we move on.
Sure thing, yep.
Are you in there,
Battle
Ethan?
Plum Creek says 1840 on Google, so I was off a couple of years.
Okay. See, it's part of the Patterson story, and I don't remember exactly which book that's in, but I don't. Like I said, I wouldn't swear to it. All right,
and
Ethan's
in 1840, it would be totally unheard of to have a Patterson there.
Yeah, it would. They'd have been in the Navy still. That could have just been a story leading up to the Patterson, probably but I probably got wrong. All right, Ethan, you there? You got some questions for us?
Yeah.
There he is. I can hear him too.
Yeah, got that sound all fixed up. Yeah. All right. I was watching you. What were you gonna say now?
I was gonna say, bring us your questions out of the chat. That's what you're keeping track of.
Okay. Well, my screen is doing something weird right now, so
you don't have questions from the chat.
I can't see the questions now.
Oh, okay. Well then, wow, we just lost Duke. Where'd you go? I'll go back and I'll read a few of these.
Duke Fraizer here from Duke Fraizer Productions.
Yeah. Yes, Snapper, I've seen Blackie's new video. That was a good one. Hi, Mom. Go through a few of these. Yeah, 2 hours of Colt. Mom says, Gina Woods says, Duke, this is not the time of year to get rid of your beard.
Sorry, I cut out of there for a second.
That Gina Woods says, Duke, this is not the time of year to get rid of your beard.
Yeah, tell me about
Especially where he lives.
Especially when you work night shift.
In Wyoming. Okay.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. We got Giant Purple People Eater 97 says, what's up, Garrett? Made my first batch of black powder, and I got it about 85 to 89 copy of percent copy of Goax. Use cedar tree charcoal. That sounds good. 2 small batches and use sugar instead of potassium nitrate in one. Never heard of that. As long as you don't blow yourself up, I think you're doing okay.
Yeah.
Cornelius Sula said, and I actually drew this up because I seen it coming. He said a Colt should have designed a bayonet for the walker that holds the loading lever in place. Well, he didn't do one for the walker, but
he did have bayonet on some Pattersons.
There it is, a bayonet on a Patterson right there.
Yeah.
So yeah,
big sticker.
And spare cylinders, which had to be hand fitted to the gun. Spare cylinders, Duke can probably tell you more about it than I can, but from what I understand, the only spare cylinder sent out with Colt guns, unless you ordered it as far as military contract, Pattersons are the only ones that came out with spare cylinders at the time of purchase, unless I'm missing something somewhere. That's
the only one I've ever seen reference to. Once in a while, you'll see a box set that's got an extra cylinder, and usually that's pretty rare. The only ones I've seen regular was the 49 pockets without the loading lever.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen quite a few of those with a spare cylinder, but that makes sense because you got to take the gun apart to reload it. But yeah, Pattersons, they had spare cylinders like crazy. Now, spare cylinders being used in combat, there's quite a few references to the Missouri guerrillas doing that. Otherwise, I've never seen a reference anywhere talks about them swapping cylinders in battle. Just those Missouri guerrilla boys, and usually that's when they take spare cylinders and they've got so many guns, it's just easier to carry the loaded cylinder than it is an entire gun.
Mm-hmm.
So basically picking it up off the dead enemy and recycling what you can.
Yeah. Ethan, are you filming on your phone?
No, I'm on my computer.
Well, then draw up the video on your phone so you can read these as we go through the next one and keep them in lined out.
My phone's on a charger. It's about dead.
Okay. Anyway, we got a couple more. He says, Garza Vlogs asked, didn't some Pattersons have loading levers?
Yeah. It was number 5 is when they started. No, I take that back. They had some loading levers on some of the earlier ones, but 39 is when they started putting the loading levers on them. They had problems just like the Walker. They weren't very strong retention system, so they would drop down. But 39, if I remember right, 39 or 40 is about when they started doing that. You could get them either way, but in comparison, the ones with loading levers, there weren't as many of those as there was without the loading levers.
Yeah. Okay, I got some right here for you. If you look to the bottom,
and the rifles and shotguns always had a loading lever on them. Yeah.
See, it's a stubby little dude. It's not a full length loading lever, at least on those two.
And there was a couple different variations of that loading lever. Like I said, there was a stubby one, then there was one that was really long that actually had like two connectors in it halfway up so that it stayed straight. And they could get quite complex. Of course, everything with a Patterson is quite complex compared to later models.
Mm-hmm. And he said, and a cut in the recoil shield. Yes, they did cut the recoil shield on the Pattersons eventually.
Basically, about the same time as the loading lever, that way that it could all be loaded on the gun without having to take it apart.
Yes. And he's also asking a question about Remington cylinders. We'll get to that. Let us get to the end of the 1860, and then we'll talk about Remington cylinders, okay? Or the 51. We'll get in there. Anyway, let's move on. Next. So, We all know that Samuel Colt went out of business in the Patterson factory. Mostly, I think it's probably because he did not have someone like Elijah K. Root who could manufacture that machinery and keep the place running. What do you think about that?
I'd say that's definitely part of it. And, you know, the fact that it took such a long time to fill orders, that's why Colts Army contracts never come through.
Mm-hmm.
Colt had a lot to learn about running a business.
Mm-hmm.
He had good business ideas, for advertisement. He was a great advertiser. I mean, he sold laughing gas for a year. You got to be a pretty good advertiser for that.
Yeah, and he just and they were so expensive. We were just talking about the pistols running from $40 to $50 and a rifle $125. You got to realize at the time the medium working man's wage in 1836 and 37 is somewhere around $13 to $15 a month. So you're talking those dudes were today they'd be a $7,000-$8,000 gun, I think.
Yeah,
they'd be high. They'd be really high. But
$13 a month, that's on the lower end of things, but still, that's respectable pay.
Mm-hmm. Because people were bartering food and things like that, and money wasn't as important to the average person, I guess. But anyway, so of course he goes out of business, and that's when he goes to making underwater mines, which obviously didn't pan out quite the way he thought it would. Him and Samuel Morse, which Samuel Morse would take the technology on, of course, and make the telegraph. But he goes out of business, and then come about 1846, somebody comes up to visit him, don't he?
Yep.
He gets a visitor.
Good old Captain Sam Walker of the United States Mounted Rifles.
Yes. Now, what's the difference between the Mounted Rifles and the Texas Rangers?
So the Texas Rangers are a state militia, and prior to December of 1845, they were the militia for Texas. That was the ones that were going to be basically your Minuteman militia. After that, then they're kind of a quasi-military because now Texas is not a state, still kind of a state militia. But as the Mexican War starts in, they kind of get, I won't say conscripted, but they volunteer on as the Texas Mounted Volunteers or Texas Volunteer Infantry, basically volunteer units from Texas that are fighting in. And that's when Sam Walker gets in. A lot of those Texas Ranger guys became Texas Mounted Volunteers. Jack Hayes wound up being the colonel for the Texas Mounted Volunteers. But at the start, Sam Walker, he's one of the commanding officers. He's down there with Taylor at where Brownsville's at now, Palo Alto, basically going across the Rio Grande, scouting around. They fight a few battles because Mexico actually, this is how the Mexican War starts. Right. You basically, to summarize the start of the Mexican War, is that you have this demilitarized zone. Because the U.S. says they own to the Rio Grande, Mexico says they own to the Nueces Strip. So you got this zone of contention, and they decide to put Taylor right on the Rio Grande. So Mexico says, well, now you've invaded Mexico, so hostilities to commence. Mexico crosses the Rio Grande, attacks Taylor in the United States. Okay, well, now Mexico's invaded the United States and attacked on American soil. It all comes down to this little strip of land down there that ain't worth a whole lot. But anyway, Sam Walker's down there, they're bouncing around doing things. And then later in 1847, when they're starting to get real serious about the Mexican War, later in 46, when they're starting to get real serious about the Mexican War, Sam Walker becomes appointed a captain of, I forget what company, of the Mounted Rifles, which is a new idea.
C Company.
C Company, that's right. Yep. So the Mounted Rifles, they're supposed to be kind of like a mounted infantry They're not quite dragoons, they're not quite cavalry, but they're mounted soldiers. And so Sam Walker, being the good Texas Ranger he was, really liked Colts revolvers and figured, hey, if we're going to go into war, we need the best that we can get. So he gets a hold of Sam Colt and says, hey, we need some guns to go fight the war. And Sam Colt basically says, how many do you need? Doesn't bother to tell him it ain't been in business since 1842. And they talk about it, and they kind of decide what they're going to come up with. And it goes through a lot of variations, and there's a prototype out there, and I wished I had a picture of it, but I can't. I don't have it with me, and I'd take forever to find it. It might be in that Belden book. Sorry, cats are making noise in the background. So the first prototype looks very much like a Patterson. It's got the Patterson grip. It doesn't have the loading lever on the barrel, but it's big, 44 caliber, 6-shot. And then they decide they have trouble with the conicals lining up with the Patterson loading lever, which yours is broke, but it's basically it's a separate piece. Mm-hmm. And so Colt says, well, hey, we can put the loading lever under the barrel and get around that. So that's when you see the loading lever put underneath the barrel. They change the grip frame around a little bit. By April of 1847, they are really starting to produce these things. And the first ones are sent to the Army in July. Then the Ordnance Board takes their sweet time of trying to approve them.
Yes. There are some nasty letters written back and forth.
Yeah. And the Walker was never tested. And if they had tested it, I think if it had been tested and all those guns that did blow up in testing, Colt would not have kept that contract. But, basically there was letters written finally. It says, hey, the boys need them. Send them out. That's it right there. That'd be the prototype.
It's got a shorter barrel, too.
Yeah,
look at that grip. It's like a Griswold and Gunnison grip.
Yeah, it really is. It's swoped back. And I think, if Colt would have went with that, I think that grip would be a little better to shoot, in my opinion. But that's just me. Anyway, so the Walkers finally arrive down in Mexico in October of 1847. So almost a full year goes by before they get into the battlefield. And at this time, Walker has been sent back to Mexico somewhere between New Orleans and Veracruz. The boat that was carrying the horses supposedly sinks. Walker arrives in Mexico. They say, all right, you ain't got horses, so you were going to make you infantry. You got rifles. You don't need these pistols now. You ain't got a horse to carry them on. So instead of Walker getting his men getting the pistols, now the Texas Mounted Volunteers, Jack Hayes' men, are going to get these pistols, a portion of them. So I think everybody under Jack Hayes' command, which was several companies, each wound up with a pair of Walkers. Now, Sam Walker did get a pair. He did have his own personal pair that Colt gave him as a gift because there was about 100 supposedly that are made that were given out as gifts. And so, dropping loading lever. Sam Walker gets a pair. Supposedly Jack Hayes. Colt sends Jack Hayes a pair. Sends Sam Houston a pair. Sends pairs to other people. Basically, it's promotional. Mm-hmm. Give you this gun, and maybe you'll buy them from us in the future. But the other 1,000, they wind up getting used in Texas. And the one problem with the Walker is that it comes out, it has no manual of arms, nothing. You don't get the little book that you get now. It tells you how many grains of powder, how to load it, how to take care of it, and all that fancy junk. So those Texas boys, some of them, quite a few of them had been playing around with the Patterson. They kind of had the idea how to load it, but you got this new type of bullet out called a elongated ball. They don't even call it a conical like we do. It's called an elongated ball. And it looks like a cone of sugar. And if you're familiar with historic sugar cones, they're a long cone. Sugar and
is that the word?
Yep, sugar loaf, right? Yep. So, it's a long cone. Actually, even looks more like an ice cream cone. Comes to a real fine point, and the boys don't know how to load them.
It has no heel on it. That's one of the main
it has
issues.
no heel on it. The other thing, so there's nothing to square it up in there. And the easiest way to load it is to actually flip it around and put the point toward the back, which, if you know anything about ballistics, loading a bullet in backwards into a gun, not a good way to have a good day. Bad things can't happen. So that, and then Colt had also recommended that the charge be no more than 50 grains. So this Walker has a cylinder that can hold 60 grains of powder.
If you're loading a round ball.
The reason for that is that you can put that conical in, or you can put that round ball in, and you got a 50 grain charge either way. But that extra length to maintain the powder charge with that longer bullet means that with a round ball, now you can get a little bit more powder in there to make up the difference, because the elongated bullet's a little longer than the round ball. And so now you're overpressuring. Steel is not that good for the cylinders. One of the things they talk about in Sam Colt's letters to, oh God, I can't remember. Was it Brown that was making the cylinders? Anyway, the company that they contracted for the cylinders.
Which, by the way, Horace Smith was working for him.
Right. So
go ahead, sorry.
One of the things in the letter says, hey, these cylinders are way too hard. They're breaking off our reamers. Can you anneal them down? So that right there tells me that they're using steel that is going to be super brittle because it's extremely hard. The harder steel is, the brittler it is. And we're talking about, and I say steel loosely, it's wrought iron. When you're talking about metal like that at that time period, it's not like metals now where you can have a super hard metal that, flexes and does this, that, and the other. Back in that time, if it's hard, it's brittle. So you already see right there, the what's going to lead up to happening here pretty quick is that these revolvers are going to fail in battle. One account talks about barrel splitting down the middle. That probably means that they had a weak charge, had a barrel obstruction, because there's a video I think Captain Ball put out where he showed a 61 Navy that had a barrel obstruction, and the exact same thing happens. It splits a barrel right down the middle into two halves. So you see that reference. You see the reference of them taking files and filing that section off. So you've got a bunch of short-barreled Walkers running around, burst cylinders, and they say up to a third of them are blown up in service. And that's in a letter that's written to the Colt factory by one of Colt's employees. Is this
from the book Samuel Colt's own account?
Yep, 1847.
Okay. Yeah. Is this the one that I read in there where I think you even pointed out to me, and then I went out and found it, that when asked how soft they could make the Walker cylinder, he said soft as lead.
Yeah, with the idea, and I imagine the idea with that is make it soft, ream it out, and then they'd harden it later on. Which if they did that, if they don't harden it right, you get brittle metal again.
I was hoping it was hyperbole.
Right. And if you anneal metal, you can make steel very soft if you anneal it right. But I've done some metal smithing in my day, and I'm not good at it. That's why I don't do it anymore. But yeah, that was the idea, is to make it easier for the reamers. Anyway, you see a record of about a third of them blowing up. At the end of the war, when they go to turn them back in, the only thing that the Army's getting is broken down Colts that ain't functional no more. Or people saying that, oh, well, blew up, so I didn't want to carry it around anymore. And they don't get all the guns back compared to what they say they put out. But then you start to think, the way the Texas Rangers just talk good things about these revolvers nonstop.
And they carry them all the way through to the 1880s.
And then I got to thinking, what would I do if I was in that situation, had a revolver I loved and didn't want to get rid of it, and there was some that were blowing? You know what? I might stick it in my saddlebag and say, hey, blew up in service, I threw it in the river.
And I actually used that in my Walker video, and you of course, I'd heard you tell me about it before, and I used that, and a lot of people were like, that makes sense. How come are so many of these 1,000 Walkers we only have 62, I believe, or even less now that are
Oh,
accounted
God.
for. Well, I mean, it's not because they turned them all in, blown up, or exploded. It's because they kept them and used them until they literally turned into rust, you know,
Right.
until there was nothing left.
And the Rangers used those guns to such great effect. And, you know, in today's society, it would be considered, you know, barbaric what they did. But you got to remember, back in that time, you know, war wasn't, you know, winning the hearts and minds. War was, we're going to find the enemy and kill them.
And the guys who were using these walkers, you have to remember, had just, if not been there, known someone who had been through the Alamo just a few years, 10 years prior.
Exactly.
And then there was Goliad. There were massacre after massacre after massacre. Santa Anna loved massacring, and many other generals from Mexico massacring Texans. They were very hardened against Mexicans at that point. And so they saw what they did as just retribution. But go ahead. Sorry.
And certainly there was some racism in there. And, you know, I wouldn't ever say that racism is justified, but it had a reason for it. If you look at the relationship between those of Hispanic descent in Texas and those of Anglo descent in Texas right after the Alamo, everybody's getting along. Everybody in that area wanted to get away from Santa Anna. But later on, you start seeing the Hispanic population wanting to go back to Mexico. Juan Seguin, very popular, or a very famous guy. He was at the Alamo, goes to Travis. He's at San Jacinto, becomes mayor of San Antonio. Later on, turns traitor to Texas and joins back up with the Mexican government. And that starts happening in the 1840s. So that's why you start seeing that resentment. And, you know, by 1846, that just comes to a head, and those Rangers, they just let loose. They don't hold back. There's talk about when Jack Hayes rides into Mexico City. There's a street vendor there, Rangers eating some of the candy stuff that he had. And one thing about the Rangers, you know, even though they're hardened men, they ain't got time for the BS. And they were pretty ruthless. As the Rangers, you know, they were honest. They paid for everything. They didn't steal. Well, this guy's sitting there eating, and supposedly the story goes that he intended to pay while the Mexican thought he was being robbed. Starts to throw a hissy fit, and the Ranger just pulls his pistol out and shoots him. There's another incident where the Mexican population is throwing rocks at the Rangers. Well, they get shot. So the Rangers didn't have time for BS. They weren't messing around. You crossed them, you died.
Yeah, and Winfield Scott and Taylor both. Well, because most of the Rangers that are in Mexico City did not ride across Mexico to get there. They came in by ship, Veracruz.
Yep.
And at this point, Winfield Scott is running one army, and Taylor is running the other, if I remember correctly. And the Texas Rangers were causing such an issue down there with they sent them home. They didn't let them finish the war. They sent them home. And I believe out of a little bit of spite, those Rangers took their saddlebags, packed a walker in it, and went home.
Yep, there was some of them. Now, Jack Hayes, they finished out the war down there. Jack Hayes' companies. And Jack Hayes, he did ride across Mexico. They went from Matamoros down through. They basically rode through there following Taylor's army because they had Mexican guerrillas that were coming in on the back. They were hitting the supply lines. That's what the Rangers were doing. They were protecting the supply lines. Once they got down to Mexico City, the two prongs that were down in central Mexico, Taylor and Scott, once they get to Mexico City, then the Rangers kind of get transferred more towards Scott. And there's another incident they talk about of U.S. soldiers going out at fandangos at night and not showing up for muster the next morning, and they find them in the streets with their throat cut. Because, you know, they'd wander off, get drunk, they'd get killed. The Texans decided they had enough of that. So those Ranger boys with their walkers started going to fandangos, a pair or two or three at a time. And they said from about 9 o'clock till midnight, it sounded like a battle was going on because there was a constant volley of fire.
Something produced by a revolving firearm.
Yeah. And the next morning at the city morgue, there was something like 80 bodies that had turned up. And after that, not another American was murdered in Mexico City for the rest of the duration of occupation.
Yeah.
But Scott wasn't really very happy about it. And then there was the incident where Jack Hayes' men, they were going to go kill Santa Anna.
Santa Anna was just back. Wasn't even president yet. What'd he do? I believe he comes in saying, "If you guys will put me back in power, I will be on your side." To the Americans, I believe.
Yep.
They helped put him back in power, and the very first thing he does is raise an army against Jack Hayes.
Well, is even earlier in the war, he asked to be put in command to take over Mexico, and he gets down there to Mexico, and the Mexicans say, "Hey, well, if you lead our armies, we'll make you president again." So he turned tail. So at this point, he's a traitor either way.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact time frame when that happened, but at this point, he's a traitor. Jack Hayes, I mean, they're pretty much, if they find him, they're going to kill him. Well, when they find him, he's already been, surrendered, and he's on his way to go get exiled back to Cuba again. And Jack Hayes stops their coach, and I'm pretty sure they hadn't have threatened Hayes with hanging him and all of his Rangers, Santa Anna would have been a dead man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But if I remember right, Hayes wound up having Santa Anna's cane. One of the other Rangers got one of his gold inlaid jackets. They got a lot of his stuff, but Santa Anna was able to get away with his life. Fortunately for him.
Okay, so let me get this straight now, because I got a pretty decent working knowledge of how this works, but you can disagree with me if you want. So we got Jack Hayes and his men marching across Mexico, being interfered with by Santa Anna on their way to Mexico City. You got Winfield, Scott, and Walker coming in from Veracruz. Now, Walker's not with Hayes. Walker's coming in with Scott. Walker is desperately fighting with the United States government over flasks at this point.
Yeah, and fighting with Colt over flasks.
Yeah.
The Walker flask that we know now, it's got that adjustable powder charge that never worked, and they still don't on the reproductions. Well, Colt wants to put a thing in there to hold the bullets, like what the Patterson flask had.
Mm-hmm.
And then Walker says, "No, we don't want that. Don't put that in there." Well, Colt winds up putting that in there. Yeah, the whole flask thing was a big fiasco. But what happens is that you lose about a third or more of your capacity with those bullets in that flask. Otherwise, that flask could easily carry a pound of powder or more.
Yes. I just, by the way, I just remembered the name. I was flipping through here and I saw it. Anson Chase was the other.
Yes.
Was the other gunsmith on the Patterson. But yeah, there's also an issue of in the United States military contracts, January 6th of 1847. A lot of people don't realize just how fast this Walker was made. He gets the contracts. Yeah. He talks to Walker after Christmas, December of 46, I think. And correct me if I'm wrong. And then it's 47, January 6th of 47. He has a military contract. He's got the first 500 guns out by June, which is,
I think it's less than 2 weeks. He's got a contract.
Yeah,
He had the first batch done in April. The second batch was done in May, and both of those batches were delivered in June.
So 1,000 pistols delivered in June, or where is it?
No, 250 on each.
Okay, yeah.
So the last of them weren't delivered until August.
Yeah.
And then from August till December that year is when Colt is starting to have a breakdown in relations with Eli Whitney.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't say that there's a lot of animosity between the two, but they figured from what I understand, from what I've read the letters, what I've interpreted is they have decided at that point that they cannot work together.
Colt keeps giving stuff away.
Yeah, and he hadn't paid up his end of the deal, and so, they're not exactly getting along well. And Eli Whitney's like, "Hey, just come get your stuff. We'll forget this. Just come get your stuff, and let's part ways." And
but there were lawsuits. There were lawsuits later on, but that was company versus company, I think, more than person versus person.
Right. So at this point in time, 47, he's establishing himself in Connecticut and Hartford. So Whitneyville, I forget where exactly it's at, but it's also in Connecticut. So he buys this little place in Hartford. At this point, he's also reviewing with the Army because they're saying, hey, these guns are blowing up. They're having some failures. We're not happy with them. And so this is what's leading us into the next model of the gun.
Before we get done with the Walkers, let's talk about Sam Walker.
Okay.
A lot of people think that his own men, when they rode out of Mexico City into the next, or not Mexico City, they rode out of Veracruz, and I can't remember the name of the next town between there and Mexico City. Everybody assumes that Walker and his entire company of mounted rifles are armed with Walker pistols, but they're not. As far as I know, there's 2 Walkers involved in the first fight that Walker pistols were involved with, and those are Samuel Walker's guns himself, which supposedly did very well with. But also, a lot of people don't realize they were fighting Lancers at the time, which Lancers did have muskets, but it was not really a fair fight. Let's put it that way at that point.
Yeah, because and people don't realize back at that time, we're still using, at that point in time, the countries are still using, soldiers that have been around since the days of the broadsword. So you have Mexican cavalry units that are just they carry around lances, and you'll see this happen clear up into the Civil War. There was Lancers in the Civil War as well. So yeah, and they're going to meet up with them at I'm going to screw this up in the pronunciation, but the Battle of Huamalta.
That's the name I was thinking of, but I didn't know how to say it. So glad you did it.
Right. So it's not far from Mexico City, so they're well on their way in. But supposedly, and there's half dozen stories of how this happens, but Sam Walker supposedly dies with his walkers in his hand, blazing away. Somebody says he gets run through with a lance, which, if that's the truth, he wasn't having a very good time with lances because he got lanced at the Battle of Walker Creek by a Comanche lance. Another one says that a Mexican that was up on the roof of a building stepped up with a shotgun and shot him out of the saddle, which that I actually would probably believe more. Because that was a fighting style that was used in Mexico City, is that, and this was with Jack Hayes and them, they were all resting in a spot, and the Mexicans found out where they were resting at, one of the bandit leaders, and, excuse me, my phone's making noise. Anyway, they all come in on the roofs of the buildings and just start unloading into the Rangers, and the Rangers with their rifles and the Walkers just sit there and like, oh, there's a head pop. There's a head pop. The Rangers didn't take very many casualties in that one, but the Mexican bandits took a lot of casualties. So yeah, when Sam Walker, I believe that he got hit with a shotgun. Others say he got lanced, like I said. Don't know the exact details of it.
I can give you the best story. I can give you the best story that I've heard. I've heard a lot of weird ones, like a Mexican lancer shoots him and then cuts his head off for killing his son. That one I don't believe at all. Phil Schreier has a very obscure, it's not a documentary, it's what I would call it's a lecture on YouTube on the Walker. And a lot of it is not, I mean, he made this back in the 90s, and a few things he definitely got wrong, like saying the Walker could hold 90 grains and that it was more powerful than a modern 44 Magnum. But he did have a pretty good take on that story, and he says they're ambushed inside of a building by a bunch of Mexicans, like you say. This is actually a combination of all these stories. Mexicans are up on top of the roof. He's inside a doorway with his Walker shooting when a Mexican lancer firing a smoothbore Escobar musket with buck and ball shoots him. And he never gets hit with the main ball, but he takes 3 buckshot pellets to his chest and dies. And so that's where you get the story of the shotgun, the lancer, the people on the roofs, and it all comes together in that. And that seemed like the most logical story to me.
But unfortunately, battles back then, they didn't keep the combat records like they do today. So unless a letter turns up in somebody's attic from somebody that was there, we can't say for sure. But I tend to believe the shotgun off of the roof was probably, because, like I said, you see that fighting style referenced a lot during the Mexican War when they're fighting in cities, and it makes sense if you look at the style of the the Hispanic structures of that time, the adobe buildings. You get up on the roof, they've got a lip on there that provides an excellent edge. It's a perfect berm, and adobe's pretty bulletproof. It's like hiding behind a solid concrete wall. That's about as close you're going to get to that at that time. So you're up on high, you got the high ground, you got a nice wall for defense. And it just played out that that kind of warfare was, I wouldn't say 100% successful because they didn't win, but it was good combat tactics.
And moving on with Walker, this is something I find very interesting because there is a Walker, one of what they call Walker's Walker at Armsmere in Connecticut right now. So there's one Walker that's Walker's Walker. However, supposedly Winfield Scott brings back 2 of Walker's Walkers to his family. So now we have 3 Walker's Walkers. And the best thing I can figure is he had his 2, but somehow he had it figured that when the company was going to get theirs, C Company, he was going to get 2 more. And maybe there are possibly 4 Walkers out there. I don't know.
Well, that would make sense because, and I haven't seen it said this, but Jack Hayes gets 2 Walkers as gifts. And then in October of 47, he reports to the ordnance, oh God, I just lost it. Quartermaster Sergeant, Arm Sergeant, whatever. And his companies are all issued with 2 Walkers. Did he get issued 2 Walkers? So was Jack Hayes riding around with 4 Walkers and 4 Pattersons that he was supposedly carried? I mean, if that's the case, Jack Hayes better have a pretty stout horse from all the iron he's in.
Well, that makes sense. But anyway, moving on from the Walker, I'll leave you with one thought on the Walker, in my opinion. And I know Duke's not going to agree with this one. It's my second least favorite Colt. Okay, it is. And in my opinion, is probably the most overappreciated Colt gun put out there because there's so few of them made. Officially 1,100. I personally think 1076 is the number. Officially 1,100 of these. 1,000 on the military, 1,000 on the civilian, or 100 on the civilian market. And that's only, they made 5,000 Pattersons.
Right.
But I mean, I grant you, I get what it is. It's the gun that gave Colt the keys to the mint. I heard that a lot. But in my opinion, it's the most overappreciated of the Colts. What's your thoughts?
And, I would agree with you to a small point, but you got to keep in mind, this gun is really nothing more than a prototype that didn't get thoroughly tested before it got produced. There's a reason why only 1,000 of them were made. They were trying to meet a contract. They never went through any testing. They got inspected. They didn't go through the testing. There was no manual. Nobody knew how to run them at the time except the Rangers. They knew how to run a revolver, but they didn't know the specifics to that gun. The loading lever design wasn't thought out at all. And all you'd had to do is pick it up and shoot it 6 times and to find out that loading lever thing's not going to work in combat.
Yeah.
So it gets the bad press for it because of the fact that it's a prototype. It got a trial by fire. It didn't take long for Sam Colt to realize, okay, we got to make some changes here. And once he made those changes, now you got a gun that, the Army likes it. A lot of people like it. The downside to both of them is that the technology at the time, that's what you had to have for size and weight to handle a 44 caliber charge.
Yes.
So was a Walker over. If it wasn't an effective combat weapon,
today,
right? Compared to today, it's a novelty. It's really what it is. It's the awe of it. Although if I was going to take a black powder handgun hunting, I'd take a Walker any day.
You wouldn't take a Dragoon?
I might take a Dragoon, but the fact that you can get 60 grains of powder in that thing with a round ball. Not that I recommend shooting the modern ones with 60 grains because, you're not going to blow it up. But what's going to happen is that force hitting that barrel. You got to remember that barrel's held on by a wedge, a little piece of metal. that force going in there, it's going to peen that out, and eventually it's going to get unshootable because you're going to get a really wide gap between your cylinder and your barrel, your forcing cone on the barrel.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, other than that, yeah, it's a novelty item. I like shooting them. I like playing with them. I think they're a lot of fun. But are they overhyped? Maybe. It's the cool factor with them.
Mm-hmm.
That's what promotes a lot of them. I don't recommend those as a first-time gun for anybody because they're a little bit more difficult to maintain with the different springs in there. But yeah, that's a story for another day.
And they're fairly expensive to shoot. But like I'm saying, in my opinion, this gun, there's not that one. Where's the Dragoon? That's the Walker. This one. In my opinion, if he could have had this to start with, they would have never been a Walker if he'd have just had, a few things ironed out.
Right.
This is technically a Walker, the Dragoon, but in my opinion is head and shoulders above it, just in ergonomics. And the forcing cone itself is so much bigger. I mean, it's just go ahead.
And if the Walker had been tested more thoroughly, you would have got that revolver a lot sooner. But it all come down to, hey, there's a war going on. We need guns. Give us what you can.
Exactly. Ethan, are you out there? We got actually 15 people in. That's the most we've had all night. I'm going to bring Ethan back in if he's out there here in a minute. We'll do some questions out of the chat over there, and then we'll move on to the Dragoon. Guys, this may run a little longer than we originally anticipated, but we're getting a good conversation, and I'm enjoying it thoroughly myself. So usually when Duke and I get to talking, it runs a while.
I don't have to work tonight, so, hey, I'm free.
Anyway, I don't see Ethan back in the back room again yet, so I'll do a few of these. Maybe he'll be back on here in a minute. Here in a little bit. All right, Blackie Thomas was in the chat here about 9:15. By the way, he has a master class out on the 51 Navy Cap and Ball Revolver. Go watch his recently uploaded video on Cap and Ball Revolver. The class costs $10. I've gotten into it. I think you have until December 1st. Correct me if I'm wrong out there, Blackie, to get this done. I went ahead and signed up for it. Blackie has a great amount of practical knowledge when it comes to these guns and working up loads. And to be quite honest, I don't have the time nor the powder to work up a perfect load. So I'm going to watch what he's got going on and I'm going to copy it. Maybe even make my own video.
Blackie's got some very good stuff. That's for sure.
Yes. Common sense and cap and ball stuff, and good videos on sighting in and such. And like I said, master class, I believe it is on cap and ball class. I believe he called it. Go check out his channel and get in there on that before it's all sold out. And I have a feeling it's going to be a really good. I haven't seen the video yet, but I'm anticipating it every day. Moving on down here, Garza Vlog said he would have stuck with a 40 grain round ball and 40 grains. Yeah, that's
absolutely
very, very reliable thing to do. Give you less loading lever trouble.
Well, and my walkers, so my first walker, I got terrible loading lever trouble with any charge until I filed the notch a little better on the retainer spring. But 40 grain charge, excellent accuracy, low recoil. The second walker that I bought has crap springs, but for whatever reason, the loading lever won't even drop on a full house charge. It won't even drop with a 200 grain conical in there and 50 grains of powder, which I got to tell you right now, that's not wise because I actually had to shave a couple grains off of that lead bullet to get it to seat. But 40 grains, definitely a very accurate load in those guns. The one thing I didn't think would be good at accuracy is the less powder you have means more space between the ball and the forcing cone, so it's going straight and then gets slams into the rifling. But with my walkers, it doesn't seem to affect them. I mean, I get groups like that if I really hold good on a good day.
Another thing to bear in mind, original walkers do not have gain rifling yet.
Nope. Yeah, that was – I don't even think the Pattersons had gain twist rifling.
No, gain twist rifling was first brought in with Elijah K. Root in February of 49. So even a few of the early Dragoons didn't have it. He patented his machine in January of 49 anyway, his rifling machine. Let's get down here. Brass 7.62. Military or Mexican artillery was using bronze cannonballs that they had a hard time making. Some of the muskets the Mexicans had were taken out of service from Britain for being out of spec after the Napoleonic Wars. Brits kept the good ones and sold bad ones. I've heard that. And that Brown Bess gun is nothing to play with.
The Mexican military had a lot of mil-serped Brown Bess muskets. Because I think by that time they had the third pattern Brown Bess, third model Brown Bess.
The shorty.
So yeah, the Mexicans had all the second models. So like the Rev War up to the Napoleonic, Britain surplus that to them. So at the Alamo, they were carrying them. So the Mexicans, they had the Brown Bess musket. You actually see a lot of Brown Bess muskets in North America at this time. They're even trade guns during fur trade. When I worked down there at Bent's, during the archaeology, they dug out a couple side plates for Brown Bess muskets. So they were definitely around. You're talking about an 11 gauge shotgun. Although it's shooting a 12 gauge ball, but that's so it's easier to load after, 15, 20 rounds. You don't have the fouling to fight with, but not real accurate. But, when you got 100 guys lined up at you shooting with 11 gauge shotguns, you don't want to be catching the lead off that.
Yeah. Blackie was back there. I mentioned him. I forgot to say what he wrote. He said, yeah, if you cut under and square off the spring, the T-spring to hold the loading lever up a lot better. Yeah, I think Duke's actually had a video out on that. The only reason I haven't done that to this one is it's a pretty well all matching with the exception of a handspring. It's pretty well all matching Colt second generation, so I didn't really want to file that T-spring on it. But I believe, was it you or was it Blackie himself that got the T-spring, got the loading lever stuck? If you got a little too sharp.
Yeah, I did.
I knew one of you did.
I was sitting there filing it, and I kept doing it. It's like, this is not. And I took one swipe, and I closed it, and I spent the next 20 minutes fighting with a screwdriver, pushing down on that spring to get it to turn loose, and it finally turned loose, and I went in with a file, and I had to round that edge just a hair, and I tell you what, it locks in so good, but it locks in so good that it's actually has peened out the dovetail a bit. I had to get in there last year with punch, and I had to reseat that dovetail because the spring was just flopping around in there loose. So if you do that fix, just keep in mind, if you get it too tight, it may peen things out.
Evening, Randy Wilson. Kevin Conway said, never go into battle with an untested weapon. That's a good point, but 6 shots.
That's very
6 shots. Yeah, but I see what the Plowboy's in. He said he's been tuned in and enjoying. Thanks, Plowboy.
Yeah, good to hear from you, Plowboy.
Okay. Overly Obsolete says, what do you all think about doing a .25 target revolver out of a Colt 49 pocket model? Dovetailed front sight, dovetailed rear sight, 25 caliber liner in the bore, sleeve chambers in the cylinder. Well, I don't know what you would be technically gaining from it. I mean,
you have a good rat killer.
What?
You have a good rat killer.
Yeah, I mean the 32 is they say it's a 31, but it's actually 33.25 or somewhere in there. It's. Right. I mean, I can see that if you're doing it with a rifle. I mean, you could do whatever you want. I don't care, but if you were doing it with a rifle, you would have a much more accurate with that long barrel and the small load, and make a nice little 25 caliber squirrel rifle. But in my opinion, the 49 pocket model is already so small and already so hard to hit with that. I probably wouldn't do it. But if you wanted to do it, I'd be interested to see it.
Yeah, and if you do that, keep in mind you're probably going to have to go to using 4F powder.
Oh,
and I know that they lots of priming powder. Yeah, well, with that one, I mean, Mike Bellevue shoots his 31 with priming powder. The reason for that is that those small bores and black powder fouling, if you're using 3F, it's leaving a little more fouling behind. You're going to foul out a small bore a lot faster than a bigger bore, if that makes sense. Yeah. That's why when I tried black powder through a 30-30, oh God, that turned into a mess.
Tight.
Yeah. And really 30 caliber and 3F. 3F is too coarse and left too much powder behind, but I wasn't brave enough to try 4F and that amount of powder. I don't think I'd blow it, but I didn't want to take a chance on my good model 94. Might try it with a Marlin someday, but anyway, yeah, if you do that, just use a finer powder with 25 caliber. If you're going to sleeve it, you're already reinforcing that. You shouldn't, with that small of a load, really run into an issue using 4F.
And he's saying the reason he wants to do 25 is because of the different projectiles available. That's a good point. But if you were going to stick with the 31, there's a couple of good projectiles available. Of course, your round ball, 325, which you can actually use a 330 in some of these U-birdies, which is a buckshot. You can just order double, I believe it's double lot buckshot is 330 now. Or single
just
lot.
Keep in mind, do not order hardened buckshot or you will break your loading lever.
Yeah, my last thing I was going to say on that is that if you can get them in stock, go over to Mark Hubbs and find you a baby Dragoon bullet mold, and you can get you a sharp projectile. But we got to move on now. We're taking a lot of time on these two guns. I know everybody. I'm sorry, but let's move on to gun number 3.
I'll add one more thing really quick. If you want to get the 31 caliber and you want to make bullets fast, get you a double out buckshot gang mold. You can pour you like 18 pellets at a time.
If you can pour that much lead before it cools off.
Exactly. Yeah.
But anyway, moving on. All right. This is the part where you're going to get into, because I have never dealt with a Whitneyville Walker, the transitional type of Whitneyville Dragoon. Sorry.
Right.
You know, you've run through these quite a bit and what they have. Basically this, but cut down. Am I right? Cut down.
So the Whitneyville Transitions, when you buy the reproduction, the Uberti Whitneyville Dragoon, what they portray as, and I've seen pictures of this, so it's an accurate reproduction, is a Walker grip frame with a Dragoon barrel and Walker lockwork. But when you start looking for Whitneyville Dragoons in the books, pictures, historical files, there wasn't a specific style. It was basically, I've got all these parts left over. I've got all these new parts I've been playing around with. Let's make money off them. So they're actually just a bunch of cobbled together. Anything that's made between the Walker for like 250 guns, that's all there is like 250 of them in existence. It's basically just a bunch of parts thrown together. I've seen pictures of them that look just like our first model Dragoon with that Walker grip frame. There's also ones that have a first model Dragoon grip frame, but then they've got Walker cylinder and barrel on it. So really, it's just they were playing around with a bunch of parts.
Yeah, Fraizer holster there, guys. If you want one for your Walker Dragoon, I'm going to show you what he's talking about here. Ooh, everything's backwards in the camera. But anyway.
Yeah, so basically some of them had that Walker grip. And you notice that there's and if you can point this out, Garrett, up on that grip frame where it meets the back of the frame of the gun, it's dished. The wood dishes into the back of the frame.
Yeah, right there.
So you see that, and then once they start getting more closer to the first model Dragoon, that squares off, and you start seeing that squared connection there. Actually, you see it from the side view. Yeah, right there. So there's that squared where it butts up to the frame of the gun.
See the round grip here on the Walker, the round, and then on the Dragoons we're getting into squares.
Yep. And so those transition, like I said, there's not very many of them. They're probably one of the rarest Colts out there, which is why they command a pretty high price when you do find an original one.
I was wondering, does anybody still actually have them? I mean, I'm not remaking them, of course, but I mean, somebody does still have one somewhere.
Yeah, you see one pop up once in a while. The thing of it is that those are easy to fake. All you got to do is just take apart a couple different guns and throw them together, and you can claim that they're Walker or they're Whitneyville Dragoons. Or transition model is the other one they call them.
The thing is, you'd have to find a Walker to take apart.
Right. Exactly.
That'd be kind of hard to do.
And
But, yeah.
really, if I was one of those guys doing this, it'll be like, I can get $1 million for the Walker. I'm only going to get a couple $100,000 for the transition just to sell the Walker as it is. But anyway, people try faking stuff all the time. So yeah, you get that transition model. Not a lot of them are made there. And then by 1848, you're starting to see the first model Dragoon, and possibly even as early as late 47, you start seeing the first model Dragoon as it'll become official being produced. And I cannot remember the numbers off the top of my head, but the first model, there was only a couple thousand, 1,500, something like that produced.
If you're out there, Snapper, chime in on that, because I know you have that on the top of your head, because he actually owns and shoots one. But
the thing being a historian is I read so much, I can't remember numbers, and so I got to go back and read it. And all my books are back in Colorado. So I
have to go back to my own Colt series now and then and say, oh,
right.
Guess I can't remember.
But yeah, so go ahead, Garrett.
A little free advertisement here, guys. This is your this is a Colt. This is a Duke's cross draw for your Dragoon. And by the way, it actually has a name because if you put your Walker in it without a toe plug, it sticks out the bottom. This is his Gus McCrae from Lonesome Dove holster. And if you want one of these, give Duke a holler. Where are you gonna get reached at, Duke?
Duke Fraizer Productions at gmail.com. And if you're curious how to spell that, just go over to my YouTube channel, my title YouTube channel at gmail.com. That's how it is. And if you're emailing me, capitalization don't matter that much. It'll still go through. But anyway, yeah. If you're wanting to order right now, I'm backed up. I'm trying to catch up on orders. I was supposed to have some done yesterday and I ain't got them done yet, but, send an email if you want to order and I'll try to get you in as quick as I can. But it's taking me a long time just because I do this as a side gig and, I got a full-time job on the side. But I do it as fast as I can. And the other thing is, I had to move out of my house because they're working on it. I don't know if I'm going to get it back or not. So I'm staying with a friend. I don't exactly have a lot of room to work on stuff. So I'm trying to get them as fast as I can.
Get your orders in early. Be patient, but I guarantee you I've been wearing one for almost 8 months now, and it hasn't let me down yet. Moving back on.
If you're wanting to buy one for a Christmas present, you might want to wait till next Christmas because I ain't going to make it before this Christmas.
Anyway, all right. So you pretty well got through what we're talking about on transitional Dragoons, transitional walkers. Let's talk about Model 1s. We're getting into some of my favorites now because it's still got the oval stops.
Right.
It's still got the standard V crazy looking hammer spring.
Right. The V mainspring.
Has the square back trigger guard, same as this Walker, which I think is the most elegant style trigger guard myself.
Right.
But what do you got to say about number 1s?
Well, one thing I'll say off just from the get-go is that everything between the Walker and the third model Dragoon really is just a transition model. It's just that they made a good number of each before they went out. So, yeah, the first model, that's when you start to see basically what's going to become the Dragoon. So, like you said, you still got the oval cylinder stops that are reminiscent of the Walker, the square back trigger guard. You still got the V mainspring. So it's still got a lot of the old Walker lock work. What has happened is that the cylinder has been shortened down to where that it cannot hold more than 50 grains. That's to keep them from bursting. To make up for that shortened cylinder, they elongate the forcing cone.
And widen it.
Yep.
See, here's
and
the
they cut
cone
the barrel down from
versus a forcing cone. Sorry, on a Walker. See that short forcing cone on the Walker? Big.
And what's interesting is that you can put a cylinder and a barrel on a Walker on a Dragoon revolver, and if the arbor was just a hair longer, they would fit. But you can't go the other way around because they shortened the arbor down as well. So yeah, shortened the barrel down. They put the catch on the loading lever, which apparently didn't do as good a job as later models would, but it was better than what the Walker had.
Walker, this is the Walker, this is the Dragoon. And the difference is Of course, the Walker has the T-spring in there, and I'm sure all of you know that. This has a spring out at the end with an upright. I call it upright. Not like the 51 Navy. Let me see if I can grab a 51 Navy here.
It's not really an inline catch. It's an offset catch.
Okay, this is the 51 Navy style catch. As you can see, it's horizontal. Yep. Whereas the Dragoon catch, if I can show them there, is very narrow, straight up and down. Same principle, different style.
Turn those guns sideways, you can see what I was saying. The 51 Navy is in line with the loading lever, which gives you a more positive lockup.
That's this one.
The catch on the Dragoon is offset. You don't get as positive lockup.
And you will see many Dragoons that I still don't know if they were redone or at some point Colts started switching them over. But a lot of pictures you'll see taken of Dragoons later on have the 51 style Navy latch on them. So people started either changing them themselves or Colt did. I don't know which.
And any competent gunsmith at the time could probably pull that off pretty easy. But those that you see with that latch on there probably didn't come from the factory like that. I've never seen one that come out of the factory like that. Any records of that? It was probably done later on. So that indicates that that catch did not work effectively because people were changing it later on.
I know I don't have a second model here to show, but when you get into second model Dragoons, what you're going to see changing is early second model Dragoons will still have the V spring and the standard hook on the hammer, but they start to get into what I call the key lead in. This is a third model, but you can see the square stop. Let me grab that Walker one more time. Cylinder stops on a Walker are oval with no lead in. That's why they get those little white lines, which original Walkers weren't blued anyway on the cylinder. But so that's what you get into. And then sometime in late 1848, 49. All right, I'm not going to give you the date. I don't remember. Sometime mid-production of second model Dragoon. And this is why I don't even count the model numbers because there's so much speculation on what changes from what model to the next, really. Like Dick was saying, they're all transitional. At some point, they go to a 51 Navy style hammer spring, which is just straight here. And then they put a roller on the hammer right down there. You can barely see it right in there. And that really, really helps the action, in my opinion. And it helps keep that spring from breaking. As far as I know, Duke, go ahead, but I think that's the difference between first and second model Dragoons.
Let's see, that second model, there's so many variations because they were changing as the second model was going through. So I bought what was labeled as a second model Dragoon used, Uberti reproduction. And when I got it, it had the flat leaf spring, but it had the oval cylinder stops. And it had the roller on the back. And I thought, what in the heck was Uberti doing? Or did somebody just gum this together out of parts? And no, all the parts numbers matched. So I got to looking up second model Dragoons. I just started looking at pictures of originals. And there's a lot of variation. The earlier ones, they were retaining some of the parts and pieces from the first model Dragoon. Mid-production, you start seeing square cylinder stops. By the mid-production, they've got the flat spring. And by the time you get into late production, just before they go to that oval trigger guard, you start seeing square cylinder stops with leads. So really, the only thing that really defines the third model is rounded trigger guard. That's the only real major difference. So that's why I say the second model is kind of a transition because you start seeing that change go out through that entire production. And I just looked it up. I was way off on my numbers. Or when I said earlier 1,500 on the first model, I was way off at 7,000.
Yeah, the second model is by far the least produced. That might be the 2,000 you're thinking of.
Yeah, 2,500. Yeah, so that's probably what I was thinking of was the second model.
It was not very long made.
Right. And one thing to keep in mind is that most of the Dragoons are Army contract. Almost every one of them is for Army contract. There's not going to be a lot of them going into the civilian market right away. which is why in 48 also Colt releases the Baby Dragoon. That is made for the civilian market. The 51 Navy that comes out a few years later in 1850, even though it's called 51 Navy, that is for the civilian market. Their Dragoon was designed for Army use, for the military.
And if you want to see a civilian market civilian Dragoon first model, go check out Wild Snapper's channel, which he's back in the chat. I was going to ask him how many first models were made, but Duke's already cleared that up for us. But
right,
yeah, second models, I think, pretty rare.
Right, and then the third model, you know, I've seen records say 18, or it's not 18, excuse me, 10,000 produced. Government records for about 8,000, and that's what I'm seeing here on this page. Is they say about 8,000 for government records. So 8,000 of them were Army contract, government contract, and you know, if there was in fact 10,000 made, that means the other 2,000 probably went out on the civilian market. And out in the West, you do see a lot of them popular. They were used by civilians out in the West. They were popular. They could bring down a buffalo if you did things right. There's one or two accounts of dragoons being used for hunting buffalo out in the West, and we're talking plainsmen. You know, by that time you're mountain men. You don't have the trappers, the old mountaineers. A lot of people are out on the plains doing things, buffalo hunting. Although it doesn't really get going real strong until later on. But
to be honest, though, neither the Walker nor the Dragoon would be my first choice to hunt a buffalo with.
You had to be a very good shot.
Let's put it this way. It's well known now that you can get basically, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. We've done tests on it. You can, with 60 grains in a round ball out of a Walker. Now you could get more with 50 grains in a conical not feet per second, but foot pounds. But anyway, if you load 60 grains in a round ball, you're getting basically the same foot pounds of energy as you would out of a snub-nosed 357 revolver, which is less than a standard 357. So my question is, when people always call these horse pistols, and a lot of people will go out there and say, well, they're called horse pistols because they were designed to take down a horse. Okay, a horse, I'll give you a comparison. How many people, a horse is like a full-grown moose, a big moose. No, big horse, about the same size. How many people do you see going on moose hunts with snub-nosed 357 Magnums?
Yeah, no kidding.
Not very many, because I mean it's powerful, especially for today. But the power of these guns can be slightly overblown, in my opinion.
The real reason they're called a horse pistol is because they were used by mounted troops, carried on a horse. Could they bring down a horse? Probably not kill it, but keep in mind, if you're facing an opponent that's mounted, they're doing most of their, ooh, those look fancy.
I wonder where I got these holsters at.
Feel free to advertise that too. If you see if you're up against a mounted unit, you really don't need to kill the opponent's horse to make it to where it doesn't operate fully. All you got to do is get a bullet in its butt or its front shoulder, and I guarantee you that horse ain't going to be moving as good as it was before it was shot.
Or he'll be moving too good.
Yeah. The other direction. Yeah. Horses, you know, they're beautiful animals. Don't say they get this as I hate horses or anything, but a horse is a fragile animal. I mean, they break a leg bone, they're done. You might as well put them out of their misery because they're never going to. Horses are very fragile. And it's a wonder that they've survived, you know, evolution for so long. But it doesn't take much to put one out of commission. A stone and a hoof puts a horse out of commission for a while. That being said, you know, if you're in mounted combat and you're riding up against the enemy, a horse's skull ain't that thick compared to like a buffalo or a cow. If you get a good headshot, that horse is done.
Yep. And another thing to bear in mind, we talk about how powerful the Walker and Dragoon are. At no point could you not have shot the same thing out of something like this.
Right. Yep.
So, you know, it just has more shots. And that was
the real horse pistols that would bring
prevalent.
down a horse. The Dragoons, they were issued the Aston 1842 model pistol, which I think was a 52 caliber smoothbore. That might stand a chance of bringing down a horse.
And you could load more than 60 grains anytime you wanted. You wouldn't hurt that gun.
Right.
I've looked at it.
You're talking a much larger bullet with much more impact. That being said, there is accounts of the Dragoons being used to hunt buffalo. Basically, hunting buffalo at this time period is not like hunting buffalo later on with the Sharps rifles where you just sit there and just pick them off like shooting fish out of a barrel. A lot of guys are hunting them Indian fashion, as they called it, where they run them. You get the buffalo run up beside it, one behind the ear, that buffalo's going down. If you get a good lung shot on a buffalo, you hit one lung, both will collapse eventually. Buffalo can be brought down easy if you know what you're doing. But you shoot them right here, you're just going to piss them off because you got about that much bone you got to go through.
Yeah, and hide on top of that.
And the hide, exactly. So you got to know what you're doing. I read one account where some guy or some historian was saying that the 51 Navy could easily bring down a buffalo from horseback. And I'm sitting there thinking, where is this guy? What world is he from? A Dragoon will do a better job than a 51 Navy, but that's a story for another day.
Yeah. Anyway, getting on into, like you said, third model Dragoons, the only differentiating today, the only way people differentiate the third model from the second model is square back trigger guard on second model, mostly round trigger guard. But and Haven and Belden pointed this out to me for the first time in the book there. Up until the 51 Navy, you could custom order, even the 60 Army, you could custom order any square back trigger guard to your Colt revolver. Yep. So you get an early third model Dragoon and you custom order it with a square back trigger guard. You've just turned an early third model Dragoon into an exact second model Dragoon. So the model numbers to me, at least second and third, definitely don't have that much bearing on the situation.
A lot of these guns were named by collectors,
mm-hmm.
and the early 1900s. They were named for the collector's market. That's how they distinguish. It's like, okay, well, this was made up to this number and it changed here. Did Colt advertise them as first, second, third model? No, they were the Army pistol of 44 caliber.
And don't be fooled. They never changed everything by the date that people think they did. They never changed everything by the date people think they did.
The 51 Navy was Colt tried to advertise that as the Ranger model, which didn't catch on. But being they advertised as naval caliber, and there's a whole another story of how that come about, people started calling it a Navy. They didn't call it 1851 Navy. They just called it Colt's Navy Revolver. Colt, one of the advertisements I did see of it was Colt's belt pistol. The 51 Navy referred to as Colt's belt pistol. Now, once the 1860 Army come out, Colt started calling the Dragoons the old model Dragoon. The old Army model. The 1860 was the new Army model.
Yeah. Well, and I've also seen them old holster model, and that was called the holster model, whereas the Navy was called the belt model, like you said. And I've actually finally officially found, I mean, it's not hard to find, but if you look through there, you actually find the true account is Colts Revolving Belt Pistol of Naval Caliber is the official name for the 51 Navy. Of 36 or naval caliber. It's actually Colts Revolving Belt Model of 36 or naval caliber. So
right. And that's the nice thing about that Haven and Belden book is they've got a lot of the old advertisements in there. So it's like you can go back and find where they advertise that.
Yeah. And never once will you see them put grease on the gun in those advertisements.
Right. And then the third model, the other thing that differentiates that is I believe that was the first one they put shoulder stocks on. And the Dragoons, the U.S. Dragoons, because at this time through the 1850s, in the early 1850s, you had two mounted units in the United States military. You had the Dragoons and the mounted rifles. By 1855, you have the introduction of the third, which is the U.S. Cavalry. In 1861, the Army decided, no, that's too much to keep track of. They just made it all U.S. Cav. So the first and second Dragoons become the first and second U.S. Cav. The first and second U.S. Cav became the third and fourth, and the U.S. Mounted Rifles just got incorporated in to other units.
Yeah.
So one cool thing about out here at Fort Laramie is it was established by Mounted Rifles, and then they wound up going on, and they was replaced by the 6th Infantry here. But by the later 1850s, you start seeing the 2nd Dragoons are established out here.
Mm-hmm.
Well, during the Civil War, they're pulled back to the east, get redesignated. Once they bring regular federal troops back out here to Fort Laramie, it is the 2nd Cav. Several of the same companies that had been during 2nd Dragoons. So out here, they distinguish the two. You know, it's all right. The Dragoons are here for about 3-4 years. The 2nd Cav is here for 7 years. Really, it's the same unit. They just changed the title in 1861.
Mm-hmm. And
but that's just a little extra.
Common use of the Dragoon. Of course, we all know that Wild Bill Hickok used a 51 Navy, but he started with a Dragoon, not a brace,
Right.
Dragoon. And supposedly over there in the Kansas City area, he could hit an oyster shell at 50 yards with it. And that was
Right.
a big deal. It made a newspaper. But anyway, that's moving. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to move on, but you had a thought, so go ahead.
Oh, okay, yeah. You see a lot of the Texas Rangers. They use the Dragoons. There's a picture of John Ford. Rip Ford is his other name. He's got a pair of them and some really fancy holsters that one of these days I'm going to take time and reproduce, but that's going to take a lot of money because, oh, man, they've got some fine silver specialty studs. But anyway, they were used out here. They were popular out in California in the 1850s. Sad to say that they were used a lot by the Anglos are moving out there to remove the Indians so that they could continue to settle California. There's a couple of historical accounts where they guys basically say if it hadn't been for the Colt, they couldn't have done the damage that they did to the Indians, which is a sad part of Colt's history, but it did happen. I mean,
the exact quote is from a Colorado senator, and then not that I agree necessarily, but the exact quote was, "Many of the Indians in the Sierra Nevada draws and mountains are scared into honest habits by men with Colts." So I was like,
yeah,
whatever. It's a different time. Different people think
you,
different ways.
You got to remember that that was a time where their white supremacy was a thing. But if you look at it from the Indian point of view, they were supreme to the whites because it was two different cultures that just didn't get along. They didn't understand each other. And so one side thought they were better than the other, and the other side felt the same.
The side that had the wheel before they showed up won.
Right. It's like that quote from the movie Fury, and it's one of my favorite quotes from that movie, is that ideals are peaceful, history is violent, and you can't really change it. It's just the way it is.
Yeah. Moving on now. So
yeah,
we got the we got to move on. No, I'm enjoying this. I thoroughly am, but I got to keep us moving, I guess. I'm stalling out.
Yeah, well, hey, if we hit 3 or 4 hours, I'm down for that.
We're going to definitely split this into 2 pieces, but it's going to be, hopefully we get to the 1860 here. We might run 3 hours instead of 2. We'll see how it goes here. But all right, so we move away from the Dragoon here. And by the way, this 3rd model Dragoon, basically pretty well out in 1850. So
I tell you what, as we're moving along, I might need to go make a quick potty break, so I'll be right back.
Go ahead. I'll get into the 49, and you can get back. You can talk about it.
All right.
There he goes. He's gone. All right. So anyway, we move away from the big Dragoon, as you were just seeing there, and we move into this little guy. And then not necessarily this guy. We moved into the baby Dragoon, which he's already discussed, which is basically this gun without a loading lever and with the oval cylinder stops that we saw before, square back trigger guard. A lot of people have those guns. They make replicas of them now. I'm not too fond of anything that doesn't have a loading lever after having played with the Patterson pretty extensively. I just decided when I bought one, I was just going to go with the standard 49 pocket model. This is the 325. This is you birdie make. And I actually enjoy it a lot, except that most of these guns have super light hammer springs. And so you can blow the hammer back off and then it causes cap jams. But anyway, before we get too far into that, let's go back here and look at some quotes. It looks like Snapper's been in the chat. Yeah, he's got a 49 pocket model, brand new. Well, it's not brand new. Of course, it's an original. I've actually seen it. He needs a horse to carry his. Okay. Really, Kevin Conway says, really good story about the lost pistols of the Superstition Mountains. I believe they were Colts. Are you talking about the missing Dragoons or the missing Pattersons? And Duke is back, it looks like. And I'm going to add him in here. I got to hit the right button. There you are.
There we are.
We're talking about the Kevin Conway commented on the lost pistols of the Superstition Mountains. I believe you've told me that story a time or two.
Yeah, so if it's the one I'm thinking of, there was a company of dragoons. I think it was the second. It was the second or the first. Anyway, 1850s. They're about. They are moving through Arizona there, and get attacked by Apaches. And the survivors get into a cave, and they decide, well, they did not want to have to carry this crate. And we're talking a box. I don't know how many Dragoon revolvers are in there exactly. They didn't want to have to carry that with them as they're moving through, because at this point they don't have horses anymore. And they don't want the Apaches to get their hands on them either, so they bury this crate of Dragoons in this cave with the idea they would come back once they got resupplied and reinforced. And they wind up surviving. They get back, and then they go back out to retrieve them, and they can't find the cave. And supposedly they're still there somewhere. Personally, I think those Apaches probably found them.
You don't think they were watching them hide them?
Because one thing that the Indians noticed is anytime that anybody in the West would make what they call a cache, and this was a tactic that was used by the mountain men prior. It was, they used it for a long time. Basically, when you couldn't move all your goods anymore, you buried them. So there was a lot of different ways of doing that they could try to keep. They tried, burying them and then build a fire over it. Well, the Indians found out pretty quick. You find a fireplace, you dig down, you got the goods.
Yep.
So yeah, it was a constant thing, and there's I hate, or I'd love to know how many caches are still out there just waiting to be found. But if you didn't do a good job burying it, the people that had been living there for hundreds of thousands of years, they know what the ground's supposed to look like. It's pretty easy to find out when the ground's been disturbed, and all of a sudden now you've got a bunch of revolvers in your hand. Not at that time that the Apaches would have known how to use them. If they hadn't had the powder and the ways to use them, they probably would have just thrown them away at that point because they were useless. But I have a feeling that somewhere somebody found those because it's been too long. There's been surveys of areas. Somebody should have found them by now if they were still there. You would think somebody should have found that cave.
Well, we're moving on now. 1848. Tell us what you think about the Baby Dragoon. 1848. Same time, it's simultaneously developed as the Big Dragoon, so it's not necessarily after.
So they're all coming out about the same time because Colt, he's got his Army contracts with the Dragoon, so he's trying to get in on the civilian market, because that's the one thing that screwed him up with the Patterson, is that he hit the military market but didn't get into the civilian market soon enough. And by the time he got into the civilian market, wasn't enough demand to justify keeping the business going. And I got a cat bothering me again. The 48, that was Colt's attempt to getting into the civilian market. From everything I've read, that Baby Dragoon wasn't a very popular gun because it retained the same issue that some of the earlier Pattersons had. You couldn't load the gun assembled. You had to disassemble it to load it. So the nice thing is you could cap it while it was assembled, but to get the chambers loaded, you had to take it apart. You had to load it and then put it back together. And that is one of the ones where I have seen spare cylinders that come with the gun. If you find a case set, original case set, usually you see a spare cylinder in with it.
Because as a Patterson, a lot of people don't realize Patterson came with a separate loading lever. Baby Dragoons didn't come with a separate loading lever. You had to use the actual base pin of the gun to push the ball into the. And after I don't know how they felt, But after playing with the Patterson for a while, that's what I was saying earlier. I don't want to play with anything else that doesn't have a loading lever on it.
Yeah, it's a pain in the butt. Yeah. So they weren't that popular. They retained a lot of the things that you had seen in the earlier lock work. You got the V mainspring, you got the oval cylinder stops, you got the square back trigger guard. And I don't believe there was too many of those made. So really, they're a prototype that gets put out on the market. And so Colt is going to redesign it in 49, probably even late 1848, redesign it and put a loading lever on it. And that's where you get the 49 pocket model.
Which there are actually 4 different variants of the 49 pocket model. We just covered the first, being the baby Dragoon. And then the second is the ever popular. He comes out. Of course, this is about the time the third model Dragoon's coming out and the 51 Navy's in development.
Right.
This is just a little third model Dragoon with the 51 Navy style latch. So,
right.
I mean,
and once he comes out with that one, boy, that blows up. I mean, they're very popular. And I think another thing that helped Colt gain in popularity was you have the California Gold Rush come in right about that same time. And when people out there in California, when people are dealing with gold, you know, you get a lot of dishonest folks coming in. And, you want to have protection. So the best available models were Colts. You see a lot of the Allen pepper boxes out there. And, you know, a 49 pocket model, you could buy one back east. I forget what the price was back east. But by the time you get out to California, by the time you get to California, you're going to pay $100 for that thing. But there was definitely high demand. That's why they were the most popular producers, like 325,000 produced.
mm-hmm.
Well over 300,000 produced. Seconded only by the 51 Navy, which is only 60,000 behind it.
And you and I have had this discussion because the 51 Navy is bringing $21. You might correct me. You probably know the prices better. I forget since the video I made.
It's between 21 and 25. The average cost of a Colt in the early days was about $20 to $25. And this is back east prices. This is not out west prices.
Yeah, and the thing, and Duke and I have discussed this before, even though the 49 pocket model is the most popular with over 250,000 plus, not counting the London models that were made, the 51 Navy made way more money because they were only a few hundred, or 60, 70,000 behind and cost twice as much. So that was 51 Navy was really the seller.
And,
by the way,
you know,
Duke Fraizer holster, guys, for your 49 pocket model. Fits like a glove.
I got to give these guys credit. I got to give Garrett and his brothers credit. They've bought more holsters for me than I think almost all my other orders combined. So,
well, we try to have one for not every variety, but every single pistol have its own because they fit so much better if you just leave one pistol to one holster and it gets to kind of knowing each other, you know. And so that works pretty good. But yeah, 49 pocket model, guys, most popular cap and ball revolver ever made.
Yep, and I do have a full flap model. I don't have it in my hand right now, but yeah, I've got a full flap, which is reminiscent of a military style that would have been, you know, made during the Civil War period. So there's a couple options there, but yeah, the Slim Jims are pretty popular.
Mm-hmm. And another thing about this gun, not as weak as a lot of people think.
It's got some knockdown power to it.
Yeah, go watch Mark Hubb's. What is it? I can't remember his channel now. That's weird.
Oh, Air's Gone Bullet Molds.
Air's Gone Bullet Molds. Yeah, he has a video out on this with a conical. Woo! That bad boy is
I was surprised. That's pushing close to some of your modern self-defense loads.
Yeah, you're between 32 ACP and 380, more than 32. But it's moving on. 49 pocket models, guys. You really want to study up on them. And Duke gave me this book, and I'm still thankful. Colts Variations of the Old Model Pocket Pistol by P.L. Schumacher, however you say his name.
I think that's Schumacher,
Yeah, and he talks about all the different variants, of which there are technically 4. We've just talked about number one and the second variant, which is the one everybody thinks of, the 49 pocket model. The third variant is kind of a mystery. It's not a mystery to Duke. It has been to me for a long time, but he's been more than kind to point out to me the error of my ways. So let's talk about that Wells Fargo model that nobody has hardly ever documented and evidently didn't exist with Wells Fargo at the time.
I think this is one of those collector's misnomers again, because there is the stagecoach holdup scene on a cylinder, and I think a lot of that leads to why it got called that. But yeah, you get the Wells Fargo model, so that's basically the 49 pocket without the loading lever. And in that book, I kept trying to figure out, well, how many did Wells Fargo purchase in order for it to get that name? And I'm reading through that book there, and the guy pretty much says, yeah, he says, I got in contact with the company that used to be Wells Fargo. I forget what it is now, and I don't even think it's around anymore. But he said, we was able to get a hold of the original records from this time period. And he said, Wells Fargo never bought any 49 pocket models. They didn't buy a single one. And he said all the ones that are out there that are stamped Wells Fargo, he says they've all been deemed fakes. Mm-hmm. So it's a real misnomer because Wells Fargo never used it.
Well, let's define the Wells Fargo model. As far as I know, you got the correct cylinder stops. You got the square cylinder stops. Right. You have the round trigger guard and the regular spring. But for some reason, they opt to not have a loading lever. Is that the only difference, right? As I recall?
Yep. And if I remember right, I think it's Shoemaker in that book. He refers to them as a police model because there were police departments that bought those without the loading lever because the idea is you don't really need to have to reload when you're using it as a police officer. You know, you load it at the station and that's what you carry all day.
I'll be honest, I want the option. Why are we going backwards, Colt? Come on. I mean, I guess if Sam Colt could sell them for the same money as he was selling everything else and not have the cost of the loading lever, it's a win-win for him. But I can't see in anybody's right mind going up to a store window and saying, this one has a loading lever, this one doesn't. I want the one without the loading lever. I guess they could technically have shorter barrels, I guess, but I think this one's plenty short.
What the thinking of that was, other than the police departments didn't want to waste a lot of money on bullets. But the and you'll see that oh god, I just lost it. But there was another one of his pistols that there was a police department that tried to buy him without the loading levers, and he said, I'm just going to make them with the loading lever. If you don't want them reloading, don't reload them. But I cannot remember the exact details on that one, so I might be remembering something else altogether. But yeah, and so yeah, they produced them. They got called the Wells Fargo model. It's a misnomer. Like 51 Navy really is a misnomer. It's a collector's name. It's basically what it is. It's a collector's name.
Yeah, and well, anyway, that's the ambiguous third model that seems to be a lot of confusion about. But like Duke said, Wells Fargo is not even in existence, I don't think, when they start making them. At least they didn't buy any then. And so,
and the Wells Fargo back then is not the Wells Fargo Bank of today.
Okay.
And Shoemaker points that out. It's a different company name in there. And if I remember right, that book is written in the 50s.
I think so.
The downside to a lot of these books is that they're just as much of a collector's item as the original gun, so it's hard to find them.
Starting to get pricey, except for this one, of course. This is copyright in 1957.
1957, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Duke gave me this one, guys. But if you're into pocket models and you want to know about variants and stories and everything else, it's a good book. Colts Variations of the Old Pocket Pistol of 1848 to 1872.
Because I don't remember. I don't think Belden gets much into the Wells Fargo.
No, they don't cover it hardly at all.
Severn does either. Because Severn has some good stuff. Actually, Severn, falling back on the Dragoons, Severn's got some really good stuff on the Dragoons. So he's got a book that's also on the Colts, and I think it's titled similarly to Haven and Belden's book. I wouldn't say that it's the Bible, Haven and Belden's Bible, But Severn's work is kind of the supplement to it. The hymn book goes along with it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If you want to read some more about 49 pocket models, Elijah K. Root, this guy has a few things wrong about things like walkers, but this is Colt,
Right.
The Making of American Legend by William Hosley, and he goes
Yep.
into great detail on Elijah K. Root's coming in and helping develop the Dragoon, the 49 pocket model, and the 51 Navy with his equipment. It's a good book to get into. But anyway, we're moving on now. We got to the third model. It's not a model, it's a variant. These not really calling these different models. I guess they call the Wells Fargo model its own model, but you have the Baby Dragoon, the 49 pocket model, the Wells Fargo model, and you also have a model that's not even named a different model. It is a 6-shot variant that came out in around 1860 and was actually pretty popular during the Civil War. And most of them had 5 and 6 inch barrels, I believe. I got to hold one. It's actually in our first gun auction action video. If you go back and watch that at the auction, I didn't buy it because it was in terrible shape. It didn't have hardly any of the internals in it, but I did get to hold an 1860 marked 6-shot 49 pocket model. And that is, to me, that's the fourth variant. Duke, you want to go into any more detail on the variants, you can. Well, I get queued up to do the next one.
I haven't read up too much on those. I just know that, there was a few of them produced. And I think that was about the time that the metallurgy changed. So they was able to get away with sticking that extra shot in there because now they could get away with a little bit thinner cylinder walls, chamber walls. But to be honest, I haven't read up too much on those. I just know that they were coming around. Yeah, they were gaining popularity, that extra shot. But then Colt kind of backtracks when he gets to the 62 pocket models and goes to a 5-shot because he belts it up and makes it a 36 caliber.
And that's technically just another model of the 49 in a different way, but it's actually It's actually considered a pocket pistol. It's just a new model. But anyway, all right, guys. So that pretty well covers the 49 pocket model. Like I said, Duke holster. If you need to get you one, these guns do work a lot better in a holster than they do a pocket. I'll just say that right now because that's getting into one of our next guns coming up.
Right.
But yeah.
And one thing I'll add on there too, and this more on the pocket thing. Everybody says, well, it's so big for a pocket gun. Pockets were bigger back then. And to some extent, that is true. But I like to wear my good old-fashioned treat Wranglers. And when I bought my first 49 pocket model, I thought, I'm going to carry it in my pocket. And you know what? On those Wranglers, you can almost 100% concealed carry that thing. It's just that hammer spur sticks out there a little bit and will catch you in the wrong spot if you sit down wrong with it. But they will conceal in a modern pocket too.
Gotta move on. Oh, I know what I did with it. All right, so
show those puffies off again.
Guys, Duke Fraizer Productions saddle holsters.
Oh, I see you didn't get the lacing back in it.
No, I haven't put it back in it yet. And they are saddlebag. And they're actually set on a pommel. If you're watching out there, never met a gun I didn't like, might be something you want to look into. They're right on the pommel. The holsters are right here. But anyway.
And one thing I'll tell you about those right quick, just for a little extra info for those that are interested, those will not set very well on a saddle that's got a wide pommel, with a wide swell. You want something that's more traditional, like a Hope style, a very narrow swell. There's some modern saddles that have a narrower swell that those will work on, but if you got a really wide swell, they're not going to work. They're going to sit out flat, and then they're not really doing much because everything's going to fall out of them. My saddle's got it is technically a roper saddle, but it's got a narrow horn and some pretty small swells right there, and it seems to set down. It doesn't have, like Duke was saying, the original saddles had a shelf off front of the horn, would help hold that. Right. But what you can do is get away with strapping it down to your D-rings and you'll be fine. But anyway, same time production of the Dragoon and the 49 pocket model, the greatest of the great, in my opinion, comes out. 51 Navy. And it's not called 51 Navy at first, of course. Not Duke's right, but I mean, it's not. This is the Ranger. And I would wish it would have stuck. I love that name. I wish they'd still call it the Ranger. This bad boy is where it's at, in my opinion. I like the 60 Army. It's good. I like the 49 pocket model. It's okay. Dragoon's okay. Walkers are
Pattersons. I only like them because they're historical. This is my favorite of all the Colt designs. And it went to military trials too, so we'll go ahead.
Really, that one's just an improved number 5 Patterson. It's beefed up to 6 shots, still 7.5-inch barrel. You got your loading lever attached. You got the added benefit of not having that concealed trigger. You got an actual trigger guard on it, which
and the lock work is 100% better.
Yeah, and so it's a simplified Patterson. Instead of having like 4 or 5 springs and all these disconnects and sears, they really simplified it down. I forget what the total number is of parts of Patterson versus 51 Navy, but it is considerably less number of parts in the Navy.
Well, the Patterson has 21, and I believe this has, I want to say, 9 moving parts. I got to think.
Yeah, it really knocks them down.
Yeah.
And really
lessens the cost.
Yeah, exactly. Really, the pocket model, the 51 Navy, they're just improved versions of the Pattersons that predated them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the 51 Navy, now you've got another intended for the civilian market, but the military wound up adopting it because they liked them. It's light. It's 36 caliber. The Texas Rangers proved that even though it's 36, it still has sufficient knockdown power for combat. And so you can carry it on your belt. You don't need to put it on a holster on a saddle. It's not going to pull your pants down when you try to carry it on a belt. That being said, there's pictures of Texas Rangers and them that carry Dragoons on their belts. But with the Navy, I mean, you had a light, effective, powerful firearm.
Very effective, very powerful.
Yep, a little more powerful in the pocket model. So the 51 Navy becomes very popular out in the West. A lot of the Texas Rangers really love the Navy revolver. They used a lot of those out here, along the Oregon Trail, Santa Fe Trail, those areas. You see a lot of 51 Navies. One of my favorite characters that hung out around down the Santa Fe Trail area was Uncle Dick Wooten. He talks about, he used the Navy to great effect, thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Of course,
and
I don't think
he knew how to put down a strike.
Yes, he did. And what's funny is, everybody says, well, you got to carry them fully loaded. And well, Uncle Dick Wooten talks about, and he very openly admits that he only had 4 rounds loaded in his gun, and he had to bluff the last 2 that weren't in there. Yeah. And the story with that, if we've got time to get into it, I'll go into it here.
Go for it.
So Uncle Dick Wooten, he starts out at Bent's Fort. He's a teamster, and then he's a hunter. And he kind of hangs out around in the southern Colorado, northern New Mexico area for pretty much the rest of his life. And one of the things that he does later on in the 1850s is he's a teamster. So he's transporting goods between St. Louis, Santa Fe on Santa Fe Trail. And on one of his returns from Santa Fe to St. Louis, he has some Mexican drivers driving his wagons for him. And they decide that they're going to mutiny on him, kill him, and sell the goods and take the money. And so he kind of got wind of it. Well, they finally moved, and they tried to shoot him. And I don't remember the exact details on it, but pretty much Uncle Dick Wooten was carrying one of those 51 Navies. He finally gets the drop on the other guys, on the Mexicans that are working for him, confiscates their guns, sends somebody or rides up or leaves somebody that he trusts in charge, rides up to somebody that operated a station that he was good friends with. And this guy had a pair of 51 Navies. And so brings them back. They managed to get the wagons up to where they're going, and then gives the guys their guns back and tells them to get lost. Doesn't want to see him again. So yeah, he came very close to getting wiped out. If he hadn't had a 51 Navy, he would have. And then there's another story that's kind of funny, and I don't remember all the details on this, but I'll make it quick, is that he's riding down the trail one day, and Dick Wooten was a known jokester, a known prankster. And so he had friends that tried to get even with him on pranks. So he's riding down the trail one day, and this guy rides up on him, draws his Navy out, and tells him to put his hands up. And Uncle Dick Wooten thinks, well, I'm getting robbed. And the guy tells him, he says, get off your horse. And Wooten gets off his horse. The guy gets off his horse and he says, take a seat. And so Wooten takes a seat and the guy sits down next to him. And I don't remember the exact detail for this, but I think the guy said, Mr. Wooten, I just wanted to let you know that I just had a baby born and I wanted to pass that information along to you. Something to that effect. Gets on his horse and rides off. And Wooten later found out that some guy that he knew with put the guy up to doing that, pulling that prank. But I found that was funny. And then 51 Navy was involved. So I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah. The 51 Navy, the #1 sidearm of the Confederacy. And
Yes.
And don't be fooled. Colt would have armed the Confederacy just as quick as he could have figured out how to do it. As a matter of fact, he did do it more than once. And yeah, I know why. I know why. It's not necessarily because this is the was available in the South before the Civil War, which it was, but it's just an all around great gun for anything you want to do in that day and era. And so, you know, people may say, well, you can't swap the cylinders out real quick. I'm here to tell you. As a matter of fact, I tried this just the other day at an auction at with a original new model Army Remington. Tried a cylinder swap. Won't do it. You know why? Because the cylinder is hand fitted and you can see it on an original. And the only way you could do it would be to hand fit the cylinder to the gun to time. You'd have to time the cylinder to the gun, I think. And it would be very difficult. You might get lucky and get two that work, but it would be very difficult to keep a gun in time if you were trying to move multiple cylinders around. But yeah, this is the 51 Navy. You don't need to move the cylinders around because in a true Civil War battle, how often are you going to use? You already probably have two if you have them. How often are you going to use them 12 shots and reload in the heat of combat? That's pretty insane.
And at that point in time, that paper cartridges were very common, so it was very effective to reload without swapping the cylinder.
Yeah.
You didn't need to. You had paper cartridges. You could almost reload them as fast as you could reload the later metallic cartridges. The only thing is you got to take a few extra steps to put the caps on.
Mm-hmm. And it's not that big a deal, really. And this, of course, would be the competition to the 51 Navy. This is a new model Navy. Of course, this one is not correct. Everybody knows the replicas that are made nowadays of the new model Remington Navies. These are just 44 caliber frames, 44 caliber cylinder and barrel. But if you look at the end of it, it's been drilled for 36. So it makes it, it's a nice gun to shoot. It really is. It has a zero recoil and it balances really well, but it's way heavier than the originals would have been. Another issue I have with this gun, I had this gun out making a video with it. I haven't cleaned it yet, but it's been like 2 days ago. And this is my third cylinder through. I had to stop making the video because on my third cylinder, it's stuck. It's froze. And the Navy versions of the Remington, especially nowadays with all that steel up in there, they seem to have far more issue with freezing up with black powder fouling. There, I got it to go, but it's just a nightmare after a few cylinders. And in reality, in the Civil War, the 55 pocket model, the Remington, all had records of that happening on the battlefield, which is why this pretty well remained really popular. In my opinion of these two, I have this every day, but that's just my opinion. I know a lot of people take me to task over it, but
I got a chance to look at an original Navy, Remington Navy, and you're absolutely right. They're not much bigger than a 51 Navy in frame size. They're quite a bit smaller than the Army model. And
they're not nearly. I mean, this thing has to weigh a pound more than an original, just because. Like I said, it's really great. I mean, it really lays down if you're not carrying it. And if you got a 50 or a new model Navy that's made nowadays, they're great shooting guns. If you can keep them operating and not freezing up or not getting black powder fouled out. But, you know, I've probably put 15 cylinders through this in one session, and I've never had it foul out and stop on me. And so that's where this gun has always shown. It points better for me, and it's not because I'm used to Colts. I started on Remingtons for 15 years. I shot nothing but Remingtons. I had a 36 and I had a new model Army. Swore by them. And then I went to this and I'm just never really looked back. The history is more there. But anyway, I don't hate the Remington. I'll get into it. Like I said, I got a Remington series planned. But yeah, as far as weapons of the Civil War go, handguns, I don't think anything was more popular on the Civil War battlefield than this. Maybe a 49 pocket model. What's your thoughts?
Right.
What do you think?
And the 60 Army was probably as popular as it was just because of 44 caliber, but 36, like I said, it's light, hits hard, and I think it was in Elmer Keith's 6 guns, where one of the Confederate veterans he had talked to was telling him that with the 44, you couldn't get as good a penetration. They said a 44 would not penetrate a steer's skull at 15 paces. It'd bounce off. Whereas the Navy would penetrate through. And when I was testing Mark Hubbs's conicals for the Navy and for the Army, we was shooting at my local range, and for a target holder, they'd put up this sheet of, I think it was about a half-inch thick rubber, just a solid rubber sheet, some sort of belting. And when I shot that with the Navy, it punched right through. But when I shot it with the 44s, my uncle and I was going out to look at the target, and we were finding the bullets, they were bouncing back at us. There was one that was like 4 feet in front of me. So something about the 44, yeah, it's got more knockdown power, but it doesn't have the penetration that the Navy. And I think what it comes down to is the velocity. The Navy had a little more velocity to it. But yeah, the Confederates loved that Navy revolver. They really did.
And in 6 guns, Elmer Keith actually points out that it penetrated so well that it didn't have knockdown power. So he said the old soldiers preferred a round ball when they were trying to knock somebody off of a horse to a conical. I don't know if that's true or not. Elmer Keith says a lot of things sometimes, but you know.
Right.
But anyway,
well, and I can understand that too, because with a round ball, you get a few more grains of powder, but really, I don't think 2 grains of powder, I'm going to have to put this to the test on a chronograph, but I don't know if 2 grains of powder is going to make that much difference.
I think what he was thinking is because it wasn't pointed, it was making a bigger, it was not piercing so much as just blunt force impact, maybe.
Right.
But anyway, the 51 Navy is so popular that the Confederates, of course, copied it, and this one doesn't have the wedge in it. This is the R, Griswold and Gunnison. It's basically a 51 Navy, the round barrel. And of course, ours has the bent grips. We did that. We have a video on that. Flat trigger guard, no scene on the cylinder. But yes, the Confederates copied it too. They didn't make near as many of them as Colts did, but that just goes to show you how much. I mean, they could have very well been copying Remingtons. They didn't. They copied Whitney's. But yeah, they copied that. And in 64, January of 64, when the Colt factory burnt down and they still had 6,000 guns on their military contract, they licensed out to a place called, let me see if I can read that. This is the, very good. Okay, Metropolitan Arms Company of New York City. And this is an original. And I was very pleased to find it the other day at an auction. Caleb actually bought this. This is a 51 Navy made by a different company from 1864 to 1865. They made 6,000 of them after the Colt company burned down, Colt factory burnt down. And they actually used some Colt machinery, and they used some Colt employees. And they made this 1851 Navy that is marked Metropolitan New York Firearms Company. And it is as carbon a copy of a 51 Navy as you could ever possibly have. This one was made in 1864. So that just tells you that the Army really wanted to keep that contract going, even though they had Remington upping their production. They still got their last 6,000 revolvers from Colt through another company, which is pretty cool. And yeah, I'll get that up there. I was really impressed when I found this. I went to buy an 1860 Army, an original. And when this came up, we kind of had to get it because they're so rare. Only 6,000 of them made.
Right. Now, hold that up again. That trigger guard, I forget, because there's like,
it's very square.
Swayze says there's 4 types of 51 Navies. So that one, you notice, has got a pretty flat bottom on that trigger guard.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of puts that towards style more that you would see in the later 1850s. Because first one, of course, was a square back trigger guard. Then you went to a rounded, and then they did the flat bottom, and then they went back to a bigger rounded there. Towards the end, I can't remember exactly the thing, but yeah, there's when you get into the 51 Navies, they go into the first, second, third, and fourth model on those too.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah, see, this is 5,502. But it's, yeah, you're right. It has a different style trigger guard. But to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't a leftover inventory Colt trigger guard.
Could
They
be.
put on it up there.
Could be.
But yeah, I just thought I had to show that off. It is a 51 Navy. It's technically a Colt, even though it's not made in the Colt factory. And yeah, I wanted to show that off just to show the North was copying Colts too.
Right. And if you look at the loading port on that barrel lug, that's an 1850 style loading port too. It's not really cut. Well, I guess it's not really cut for the conicals.
That
looks like what Pieta made their copies off of, because that's pretty much the Pieta reproduction loading port.
Yeah. So here's a Pieta loading port. And
see
how there's a bigger square area where you can see well, I guess you can see on both, but right. I feel like their square area is a little bit bigger.
Apparently Pieta has changed their loading port since the last one I bought, because that one just made a liar out of me.
It might be, but anyway, I was going to show that off. But anyway, so yeah, 51 Navies. Of course, we all know what Wild Bill Hickok could do with his 51 Navies. Shot people.
Yep.
Sometimes he shot so fast they got him in trouble.
Yep. Yeah, he didn't. He was kind of those shot first and asked questions later. Didn't serve him very well with Phil Coe.
Nope. Wound up getting his own deputy killed. But anyway, moving on. So we finally move out of the 51 Navy.
Maybe I don't remember that.
We're going to go back to wherever I put it. Where did I put that thing? I got so many guns laying around here in different places, I can't keep track of what went where. All right, there it is. Big Fraizer holster, everybody. We're going to get you one. Anyway, so going back in 1854 and 1855. By the way, the 51 Navy, I think we already pointed this out, not made in 1851, made in 1850. Actually designed in 49. Yeah, so you got this, which is, like Duke said, too big to be a pocket pistol. Just a little bit. So we're going to get into the box. We don't open the box very often. I hate to see what's in here. It might be all rusted. And here we have a complete in the set, except for the captain, a 55 root pocket revolver. It's not actually called a root. It's called the 55 new pocket model. And this is a pocket model.
Right.
And the reason, by the way, flask and everything in there is original. I'll slam that box every time. I'll just hold it up there so you get a feeling. I mean, it's night and day, the difference, the feeling here. And it might be because one's a replica, but I put that one down there. But yeah, see, it's quite a bit smaller. And top to bottom, it's narrower, especially in the grip and the, can't see it there. Especially in the grip and the frame. The 55 is quite a bit more narrow. And if it looks like something's wrong there, it's because that one grip is chipped. But yeah.
I'm just going to point out something right quick for all you Remington fanboys out there that said Colt copied the Remington when he made the 73 single action. Look at that. It's got a top strap. That's before the 58 Remington.
Which was actually a 61 Remington.
Right. And, well, no, the 58 Remington had a top strap too. But
yeah.
The reproductions are actually 63s, but that's another story for another day. Colt was experimenting with top straps clear back as the 1840s. There's a Dragoon prototype. It's got a top strap on it. It was actually a flip top. So the idea that, the Smith & Wesson come up with the idea of a flip top, that ain't holding water either. So right there, Colt didn't copy them. They copied Colt. Everybody copied Colt.
Yeah, you see that Smith & Wesson spur trigger? That didn't come out on Smith & Wesson until 58. But Colt has it right here.
Colt could have gotten an indefinite patent. He would have been the only revolver manufacturer to have ever existed.
Exactly. But as you can see, the difference in the 55 and the 49 pocket model, I'll point it out here again. I'm going to hold them up like this, maybe. That'll show you something. See the difference in the trigger guard width and the frame width itself. The 55 is far, far more narrow. And that is because, of course, on this, just like a standard Colt, all the action's inside the frame. On the root or the 55 pocket model, the hammer is there. The ratchet and the ratchet pin is back here, hand. And of course, this is just a cylinder that goes all the way. This pin goes all the way through the cylinder and locks in with 2 keys. The entire cylinder spins. And you probably can't see it from that angle. Let me turn it around. The entire cylinder pin spins and turns the cylinder. Watch that cylinder pin back there. All right, see, it locks into position. And the reason this gun is still stout, of course, it's got the top strap so it can take whatever you throw at it really in that little bitty cylinder. But the reason it's so thin is that those action pieces are all on the outside. One more time, let me show you this from the back on the top. This might be the most telling. Look at the frames right there at the top of the grip.
Yep.
Extremely thin and narrow and smaller barrel. This is a pocket pistol. And of course he would go on. This is, people call it the root pistol. It is the very first one to have the creeping loading lever. And that's really, to this pistol, that's really the only contribution Root gave to it was the creeping loading lever. He made if you go watch Forgotten Weapons and see the zigzag Root revolvers, he did patent the zigzags on that revolver, but they didn't, there's very few of them. So the Root revolver, the only part about it that's Root is the loading lever. The rest of this, 100% Colt's idea. He had been working on these ideas ever since 1836. This is the first time he got it to actually work out. And he, of course, made shotguns and rifles and all kinds of stuff with this design because they could be made lighter. They technically could.
And if anybody's wondering who Root was Colt's top engineer. And Root wound up being president of the company after Colt died for a number of years, I think up until 1872.
Well, 2 years. I think it was only 2 years. He died
Was it only
quick.
2?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know he was president of the company for a while. And
yeah, he was.
If I'm thinking of another guy.
Yeah, we had this discussion the other day.
Yeah, we did, and I can't remember who it said, but yeah. So Root was in there, and then another guy come in, and the other guy was one of the ones that helped design the 73 single action.
Yeah, I can tell you right here, it's right in the front of the book.
Yeah, because I got the list of the presidents.
Like page 2 or 10. All right, here we go. Yeah, Elijah K. Root was president from 62 to 65, so right after Colt's death.
Okay.
The next guy was Richard W.S. Jarvis. Must have been related to Elizabeth, Colt's wife. He was from 1865 to 1901, so yeah, he covered the whole spectrum. But yeah, no, it was very well designed. I've never shot a 55 or Root style rifle. I don't intend to necessarily. I mean, I would, I guess, but I don't feel like it's something I want to do, to put my hand in front of that cylinder. We've all seen chain fires.
There was a company. I can't remember who it was, but there was a company that made reproductions of those. In the rifle 44, there was rifles and then the carbines, and they are excellent reproductions. I've handled a couple of them. The thing of it was is that they were so unpopular, so few people bought them, that they made so few of them that they're actually rarer than the original 55 rifles and carbines, and in some instances can be worth more than the original.
I've seen that. The originals weren't bad for. I know Berdan's guys used them in the Civil War. Colt outfitted his own company that he never actually got to lead into war with his own rifles. Don't tell me that wasn't a conflict of interest and a PR stunt. But yeah, they were popular as far as back then. Especially, I think the shotguns would have had more use to me than the rifles probably. But wow.
The interesting thing about Colt, you mentioned earlier that he sold a few to the Confederacy, and he did get a few through. He sold some to the Texas Rangers after secession. Colt was not a man to let his political ideals get in the way of making good profit. Colt was a businessman.
No, he was very much planning on setting up a factory or at least a warehouse in Georgia before the war started. And he could at least have it full, and he could say, "Oh, I don't know what they're out of my hands now. Let them sell them." but he never got it done.
Colt managed to, he, like you said, he raised a unit. He became Colonel Colt with the idea of probably going to sell more guns.
He actually became Colonel Colt way before the Civil War somehow. Did you ever notice that? And I've heard a lot of different things, but I don't know what the true story is.
You know, I've seen the name Colonel, Captain, like a military rank applied to a lot of civilians.
Mm-hmm.
It's like where I work down there at Bent's Fort. Sometimes you see William Bent referred to as Colonel Bent or Captain Bent. No, it's Colonel Bent. Yeah. So I think they applied that name to kind of gain prominence. Or if they were part of a militia or state militia or something and had got that rank, they just used that in their title to, for prominence. But yeah, Colonel Colt definitely has an idea to sell more guns.
Yeah, because he got married in 1856, and I was just watching today where Rock Island has the guns that he gave to his best man, one of like 5 of a triple set. I mean, he made like 5 triple sets, and he gave them to this guy, and they're some of the first in 1856 marked Colonel Sam Colt. That 49 pocket model that Snapper just bought, I was handling at that auction. It was marked just Sam Colt. So it was pretty early, I think. He might have the numbers on it. I don't know. Let's get over here to our chat. We got a few chats going on. It hasn't been too lively tonight, but I've had a lot of fun. Let's see.
We're going to the 60 Army tonight or the 62 pocket?
Let's go to 60 Army tonight, and then we'll make another one. We'll go from that to the 73. How's that sound?
I was thinking that if we did the 62, we could go from the black powder, and the next one just step right off into the cartridge. But
that sounds good to me. If you guys out there can stay with us long enough, we can go to the pocket police.
Because, there ain't a lot to talk about on those.
No. Actually, I think I even have them here, so I wasn't planning on, but we can definitely do it. Let's go over here and read a few chats. Snapper says 49 pocket model is his newest toy. Yes, I know. I've seen it. It was a pretty sharp 49 pocket model. Caleb tried to buy it from you. I had to stop him. He didn't know you were bidding on it. I actually had some of that in the video that'll be coming up next week. Gun Auction Action 2. 49 pocket model is his newest toy. He says, I know he had something up here. He was asking just a minute ago to see what Duke had for holsters for the 49, or not for the 49 or the Dragoon, and he has the first model, both of them originals. And I think that was a standard barrel length 49 pocket model. I can't remember, but he's going to have to get in contact with you. Duke, tell him where to go to get in contact with you.
Duke Fraizer Productions at gmail.com. And if you want to know how to spell it, go over to my my YouTube channel, and it's the title at gmail.com. I would change my name on here, but I don't know how to do that after I've been in.
That's okay. He's got several different varieties, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. For the Dragoon, you have a full flap for the Dragoon?
Yeah, I've got a full flap, and again, it is basically like the Gus style. It's an open toe, so a walker's going to stick out, and that is a copy of an original. There's a photograph of 2 Texas Rangers in 1848. One of them's got one strapped on his hip, and that is a copy. That barrel's sticking out on that one. So the Dragoon comes right flush with the bottom, full flap. Then of course the Slim Jim that Garrett has there.
Yeah, this is a cross draw. Guess style. And we have it in black too, but I don't have it here right now.
The full flap is also cross draw, but more of a straight up and down cross draw. So it's a butt forward, straight up and down. And then for the pocket model, there's a Slim Jim that Garrett showed you, and then I've got a full flap for it as well. And don't ask me my prices. I don't remember what I had listed on there. I think the Slim Jim I was doing $55.60 and the full flap $65.
You need to measure.
Where's your holster for that Smith & Wesson, that full flap?
It's not here tonight. I didn't bring any Smith & Wesson stuff.
Oh, okay. Because it's the exact same holster.
I can send him a picture of it later. But make sure, Snapper, if you're going to do that, make sure you measure your barrel, because there are 3 different barrel lengths, I believe, and that one could be in the middle. You'll want to know that. Anyway, go longer, Snapper says. This is great. All right, we'll go on if you want us to. see, brass 7.62, 1930s, Tularosa Valley of New Mexico. Ranchers found a cache of some kind of Belgian caplock rifle buried in Arroyo. People think they were buried during the Civil War when the Northern troops fled La Crosse. Sorry if I didn't pronounce that right. One of them in the White Sands Museum. He says in the Tularosa Valley of New Mexico.
Yeah.
Yeah. And let's see.
I suppose that's probably close to the town of Tularosa.
Yeah. West Covina Dodge. Hey, that's one of yours. He said,
hey, West Covina, what's going on?
He said, hi, side chat. Hey, Duke and Bang Bang. Thanks for the Colt trivia. Well, you're welcome. Everybody's saying for us to keep going. We still got 12 people in here. We've had up to 16. So 12's not bad. I guess we're going to keep going. We were going to keep going one ways anyway. Anyway. All right. So the 55 is great. They're starting to get into what they call in London the Bessemer process, which is the taking before everything Colt was using is what he refers to as hammered cast steel, which Duke has pointed out is wrought iron, not cast iron. I'm tired of people calling it cast iron. It's not. It's wrought iron. And
hammered cast. So you take a hot piece of iron and you hammer it into your cast.
But it's not like pot metal, okay? I can tell you that much. Hammered cast steel is stouter than that, but anyway, I digress. I just got a 10 gauge that was wrought iron hammered cast steel. I said it from Eli Whitney. It was written right there on the barrel, and I thought that was kind of something to bear in mind.
Just a little quick add in right quick. If you ever watch a video on how it's made, where how it's made goes to the Uberti factory when they're making the guns, they take those billets of steel with red hot and they hammer them in with the swage to get the frame.
Mm-hmm.
Basically hammer cast steel. It's just better steel.
Yep. And anyway, in London in 1855, they're starting to use what's called the Bessemer process, which is they're taking their steel and instead of just forging it, pouring it, melting it hot, and then pouring it, casting it, what they're doing is they're putting it in this big cauldron and blowing heat from the bottom and allowing air pockets to come up through the top. And what they're getting is a much more purified steel, higher carbon. Yep. And this is about the time, of course, that 55 pocket model starts coming out, a little bit lighter. They start making the 6-shot. Colt starts making the 6-shot 49 pocket models. Colt had a lot of interest going on over there in London. He had a factory there for a good amount of time. It closes in 1857. But he definitely was sourcing parts from there. And when he decides that he's got good enough steel from the Bessemer process, he takes his 51 Navy 36, and he still has out the Dragoon 3rd model, which I don't know what I did with it now. It's in Duke's holster. I wonder I could say, it's so big and bulky and heavy because it's made out of hammer cast steel, which these ones today aren't, luckily. And he kind of combines the two, and with the Bessemer process, comes out with the 1860 Army.
Ooh, you got the full fluted.
Yeah, I got the McCulloch, and it needs clean. I was shooting it the other day, but this is the first 1860 Army that he comes out with. Roughly about, I want to say about 2,500 of these are made. I may be wrong off the top of my head. There's not very many of them because even with the best steel, as you can see, those cylinders are fairly narrow. Yeah, I know it's dirty. I need to clean it. I shot it a few days ago, but they're fairly narrow. Not a lot of steel around there. And Duke, tell them about the Texas Rangers. You're the Texas Ranger guy and the McCulloch Colts.
Yep. So Texas is at this point seceded from the Union. You still got the Texas Rangers running around because they're and at this point they're a state militia pretty much. They're running around trying to defend the frontier because the Comanches are still pretty well ticked off that the Texans exist. And so they're causing depredations. The federal troops have been pushed back. There's nobody out there to defend the settlers, the farmers, the ranchers. And so Texas starts to kick up the numbers of the troops, and they need arms. And so McCulloch writes to Sam Colt, says, "Hey, we need revolvers because we're getting overrun down here." Colt they go back and forth, and then Colt doesn't want to do it because it's Confederate state. And McCulloch basically says, "Well, if you send them to us, we'll pretty much promise you they never will be used against Northern armies. It's for the home defense only." And so Colt finally agrees. They get the money through. Colt makes them, runs a blockade, and they get distributed to the Rangers. And then eventually, I think a good number of them did wind up with a few of the Confederate forces.
In the Red River campaign, they were pretty popular.
Yeah. So, and that was early enough in that they had the fluted cylinders. But it didn't take Colt very long to figure out that those fluted cylinders blow up in service. So that's when they quit putting the flutes in. They just left the belted up cylinder. And after that, they were perfectly fine.
Yes.
But people ask me, well, why did the Navy get called the Navy if the cylinder scene was what gave it the name, and the Army still got the naval scene on the cylinder? And it's like, well, originally it wasn't going to have that. It was going to be a fluted cylinder, but when they had to belt them back up, they just kept things simple and kept the same engraving.
And it's not the American Navy anyway.
Nope, it's Texas Navy.
Yep. So it's irrelevant to say that it was going to the United States Navy, and that's why. But anyway, yeah, no, he made actually, as far as I can tell, there's a couple different stories floating around out there. But as far as I can tell, he sent an order of 2,000 of these bad boys down there. And some people say he sent 2,000 and 1,000 got through. Some people say he sent 1,000 and 500 got through. They had to run the blockade, go in through Louisiana, and go to Texas. And I don't know what the true story is. I know that half of that order did not make it. But he also supplied the Northern Army with fluted cylinders, and they tested them, and they were the ones that blew them up. Kind of a funny running theme of him testing out his guns on the Rangers and letting them blow them up and then fixing what they did. But yeah, that was the fluted cylinder model. And like he's saying, this is what it became.
Right.
A really heavy barrel. I mean, everything on here is basically a 51 Navy as far as the frame's concerned. Not the grip, not the barrel. You can see right here again, we got that Elijah K. Root creeping loading lever. Completely different loading lever than the 51 Navy. Let me show you a side-by-side just so most of you, of course, know already, but I'll let you see the two loading levers side by side. You see the 51 Navy up here has that single pinpoint, whereas this 60 Army down here has the complete loading lever enclosed and a ratchet system in there. And the water table is cut on these 1860 Armies. And I never thought about it, but Wild Snapper going over there and just this evening on a video, and he hit an original 51 Navy, and he put a 60 Army cylinder in it. Fit just fine. It would probably be tight if it didn't have the water table cut or anything. But and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. I don't know if you can see it. You see, there's a little bitty. Let me move my finger around here. Right there, there's a little bitty drop in the frame for this rebated cylinder to go down in there. And according to with his original anyway, you can put a 60 Army cylinder in a 51 Navy, but it's really tight. It'd probably foul out pretty fast.
Yep.
But yeah, very popular with the North and with any Southern that could get their hands on it.
And that creeping loading lever is a lot stronger than the 51 Navy loading lever. That's why it's going to get redesigned. The Navy does get redesigned for the new line in 62. Or excuse me, 61. In 61.
Yes, and if you look in there and you see balls, yes, this one is loaded, but it's not capped. So don't worry about that. It's not going to go off. This one is not loaded because I just shot them all out and forgot to clean it. Well, I didn't really forget. I just haven't done it.
I've been thinking about ordering a fluted cylinder for my 1860 just because with the character that I'm portraying for a civilian scout out in the West, I thought maybe that might fit a little better than the belted cylinder.
Yeah.
But
see, you call it belted, I call it rebated. I guess it's just a difference of terms, but
Well,
Have you seen belted in the books? I mean, or rebated? What's it officially called? I haven't looked that deeply.
I'd have to look again at it. The reason I call it belted is because they added it on, whereas rebate would be taking it off.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, either way, you get the idea across. It's got a step in the cylinder.
Yeah, absolutely, it does, and it's an excellent design. I just prefer, and if I was into 44s, I would say that's a better gun than the 51 Navy. But I like the 36. The reason I think they put that loading lever on there to start with is 44 is inherently harder to load than a 36 because cutting a ring, you're cutting more lead. The bigger the ball, the more lead you're cutting. And so
more surface area.
Yeah, it actually helps to have that. But I'm going to show Duke something here. I'm going to brag just a little bit. Yeah. One that Duke don't have. And it's nice too. It better be because now,
that is a thick book.
Oh, it's big. And right now, if you wanted to buy this right now, it's going to be $175 because the first print just ended.
Oh man!
So until they run it again, oh yeah, I have barely. I mean, they sent this thing to me in a. Caleb got it for me for Christmas, but it was a really early Christmas present. But they sent this thing wrapped in bubble wrap and foam and in a big box. And I was glad too, because it is a super nice book. If you want, this is probably the authoritative book on the 60 Army, in my opinion. It was not.
I'm going to have to add that to my collection.
Yeah. And it's, let me see, I think it was written in 2017, maybe? Yeah.
It's a fairly new book. Yeah.
2017. And they just now got through the first print run. It was $60 last summer. Now it's $170 if you want it.
Oh, great!
Hopefully they run another print of them. But yeah, this is just an entire book of nothing but 1860 armies. Which the 1860 Army episode on our channel is going to be big. We're going to use all that.
I got to give you guys credit. I wanted to do that video series. On the evolution of the Colts, and you guys kind of made that dream come true.
Well, I didn't even know. After I started, I went back and seen you were going to do it, and I felt bad because then I was like, well, I already started, and I didn't know you were going to do it at the time, or I'd just let you do it.
Well, and you know, I really like how mine was going to be I was being pretty ambitious because I was going to fly back east and go to all the sites and stuff where these guns were used in film, and then realized that $10,000 that I thought would cover that wasn't even going to come close to touching it. But yeah, that's when I come across you guys' channel. I'm sitting there watching. I'm like, holy crap, these guys are good.
Don't watch the first two. The first one, the Patterson, needs to be remade. I need to take it down, I know. But it was just, it's not necessarily the information is bad. Back then, all I had was the one book. I had Haven and Belden and the internet. The information's good, according to them. Some of it's disputed now. What I don't like about it is the whole thing's just nothing but a camera pointed at my gut, and you hear a voice, and that's all you hear and all you see. I was 300 pounds, and that's all you could see back then. But
I ain't far behind you, brother.
I believe that I dropped back down to about 225 now, but I believe that I confused in that video the Battle of Walker Creek and Enchanted Rock. That was the main thing I was confused about, but I wasn't confused. I think I just said it. And then once, Duke, once a video's up and has like 500-800 views and they didn't have the YouTube edit back then, I would have had to take it clear down and re-upload it on my phone. So I didn't. I just put a disclaimer in the comments. But yeah, it needs to be remade. But yeah, what's your thoughts on the 60 Army versus the 51 Navy, Duke?
Well, of the two, I like the two. I like them both. I prefer the 51 Navy. Big thing is the grip frame. The 51 Navy grip frame is just awesome. That's why they go back to it in later models. The 1873 single action Army. The 44 caliber, it's nice. It's got a little bit more knockdown power. But really, it's shooting the Navy. It just feels better. If I was going to go into a battle and have a choice between those two and a Remington, I'd take those two over the Remington any day. But my first choice is going to be the Navy.
Yeah, it's enough.
Right. It will get the job done if you know what you're doing. That being said, modern terms, when I pick up a gun, if it ain't 45, it's, just a pea shooter in my opinion. But there's something about the Navy. I like the Navy better. I really do. And the 61 Navy, I think that is the most beautiful gun. But if I was down to the 51 Navy or the 61, I'd still take the 51 Navy because there's just something about that gun that just feels good.
That octagon barrel puts a little more weight out there. The bead front sight's a lot more fine. And that's something I wasn't pointing out, I guess, on the 60 Armies. Let me go back down here. They go back to, let me go back down here to the Walker. One of the stipulations that Walker gave Colt when he was making designing the Walker was he went from, if you can see, that one's hard to see on this one because it's been filed down on the second generation. Somebody did it. Okay, so here's a Patterson again. Let me see if I can get that in frame. All right, see that little bead front sight. Walker wanted that front sight, which is a blade, a long blade.
Right.
I don't know what made him determine that was going to be something that was a must-do thing, but it was. And so we went to that blade, and on the 51 Navy and the 49 pocket model, Colt goes back to the bead. On the 1860 Armies, we're back to a blade.
Right.
What's your thoughts? Why? I never have read why. I never read what.
So one thing on the Patterson is that bead front sight. I think they had like a blade that was about the same thickness as that bead, but it was a small blade because my Uberti is just a real thin blade sight.
It is a blade. See, this one that they're making is a bead.
I think Patterson. It does that just for simplicity.
Probably makes sense
on their 51s, but one thing you'll see in history on those 51 Navies and some other models is that those are replaced and dovetailed with a blade. They take those beads out and put a blade in. And my experience shooting a 51 Navy conversion that was made by Army San Marco is those beads are pressed into the barrel. If they turn loose, they're gone.
Yeah.
So I think the blade sight, it was a better setup because less likely to get broke off, fall off. And the other thing is drawn out of a holster. If it goes through the toe, the way that blade sight set up, it'll come straight through. Whereas when you got that bead, it stands up. It's a hard, because that's one thing I noticed on my Bohannon holsters when I draw it is on the 51 Navy. Sometimes that little bead likes to hang up as it's coming out of the holster. That might not have been the issue back then, but it's something to think about. But I think it comes down to it's not going to fall off as easy, not going to get busted off as easily. And there is a little bit more substantial to see there as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, another thing I wanted to point out on the 51 Navy, what I shoot, and depending on what you shoot conical wise, a lot of people will 17 grains. I don't shoot a lot of conicals. We have the Richmond Lee ball mold, but since I shoot a Pieta, and that Richmond Lee conical mold actually throws out a 390, and Pietas almost always universally shoot 375s. Uberti shoot 380s, but that original mold is a 390, and so it is almost impossible to load. So I almost always shoot round balls. But anyway, when you're shooting round ball in a 51 Navy, I can get 21 comfortably shoot accurately 21 grains of 3F with a round ball. On this gun, I'll shoot 32 grains of 3F in a round ball. I mean, that's a little higher than the original charge, but that is what my spout throws. So, but you can get almost 1,000 feet a second out of this gun. It's very impressive ballistically for what it is for a cap and ball revolver. And honestly, I don't think you're getting a whole lot more out of the Dragoon, even with 50 grains. I mean, you might get a couple, maybe I'd say you get 150 feet per second more. But once you get up there, you're just burning powder out of the end of the barrel.
Right. That's the thing with black powders. You only get so far before you just waste powder. Because trying to remember. I think Walker, one guy I remember watched testing, they was pushing at 1100.
And you see, that's only, and it's well known you can get 1,000 feet per second out of a 60 Army. So you're 100 feet a second is nothing to sneeze at. But at the same time,
I wonder, because when I tested the Johnson and Dows, I can't remember what I was getting, but I know my freaking wads were throwing off my readings quite a bit. But I think with the 200 grain conical, I was pushing in the 800 feet per second range with the 1860 Army. And that's one thing that's interesting is that once you get to that kind of that 200 grain area conical, everything from the 1860 Army up that the Army uses in 45 is pushing about the same speed. It's just that the cartridge gets to a fixed and then it gets a little shorter and gets to semi-automatic, but really it's the same ballistically across. But
the powder got better.
Yeah, powder gets better, more reliable, less likely to get wet.
and it just burns hotter.
Yeah. But one of these days I want to do a video, and you guys might beat me to this, but compare the Walker to the 45 single action Army, because I really, when people say the Walker is equivalent of 357 Magnum, or was most powerful, it was the most powerful handgun until the 357 Magnum, I think that single action Army is going to be pretty close to beating that out. I really do think that.
You think it's just because the powder is better, loaded, tighter, compacted, or what?
That the primer. And you got to remember, you're getting a higher velocity with a Walker because you're shooting a little bit lighter bullet. That 73 single action is a 250 grain bullet. So whenever I get to test this, or maybe if you get to test it, Arizgon Bullet Molds has got that Sugarloaf bullet that's like 250 grains. I'm going to use that as a comparison with about the same amount of powder charge, and then kick it up to the I think on the Walker, I think 40 is the max you can put in the Walker with that bullet. But anyway,
I never thought of that. You can only load 40 with the conical in there.
Yeah,
and you can load 40 all day in a single action Army.
Now the Pickett conical was a little bit smaller. It's about a 200 grain bullet. That's why you get 50 grains with that in there. But that's one thing on the Walkers. The bigger bullets you get is less powder. So is it really going to have the same power? That's why I think that the 45 Colt actually probably ought to have that title of the most powerful handgun until a 357.
So what we should do is attempt to, and I've actually got a round in there I've attempted it with, attempt to put a round ball, a 4.51 round ball in a 45 Colt case and see if we can push it any faster.
Yeah, and use 40 grains of powder with that. Yeah, try and see.
Yeah.
But Lee makes, or they used to, I hope they still do, makes a bullet mold that is almost identical to the original bullet that was used in 73 single action. When the 45 Colt first come out. So that's going to be the bullet that I use to test whenever I get money saved up to do that. But maybe that might be a collaboration project in the future.
Yeah, it might have to be. I got a collaboration coming up on some safety stuff with Wild Snapper. We'll film some more stuff because I got a lot of ideas too, and it sounds like you do too. We need to work that out. But yeah,
right.
Going back to 60 Army, I think we've pretty well covered it. I mean, they make it from 1860 to 1872, 71, 72. I haven't done much study on it.
I think 72 was when they quit making the captain balls altogether.
Yeah, but I didn't know if the open top had proceeded to take the 60 Army out.
Because the open tops
71 and 72.
Richard Mason conversions in the late 60s, 69. By 71, they're starting to develop what'll become the open top. By 72, the open top's out, and then 73, they've got the 73 single action coming out there. But yeah, in 72, because basically, yeah, you're pretty much in the cartridge era at that point.
Yeah, but anyway, so we pretty well covered that. I mean, it's really popular in the West. You got any good Western stories about the 60 Army? or is everybody still 51 Navy overshadows everything
Right.
that I can think of.
One thing that I found interesting is that the Colt was used a lot out here during the Civil War, and the Indian Wars that were taking place during the Civil War. So one thing that happened in the Civil War is all the federal troops get pulled back east. Out here at Fort Laramie, 1861, you start seeing them getting shoved back east. By 62, it's pretty much all state militia that are out, state volunteer troops that are out in the West. There's, I think, the 4th Artillery comes through Fort Laramie for a couple months during the Civil War, and there's one regular cav unit and one regular infantry. And when I say unit, I mean company. And these are in short order. Like, they're assigned here for a couple months, and then they get pulled back east too. But you see, the 11th Ohio was out here for the longest. They're all carrying Colts. There was a Kansas unit, a couple companies out of Kansas. They were out here. The Colts were used out in the West during that time quite a bit, and you would think that they would be back east, but a lot of mounted units were used out here in the Western Civil War just because they were better able to fight the warfare that was being fought out here. It takes infantry forever to get from one point to the other, and so they had mounted on mounted. And of course, once they get back to in the 1870s, and they start going back to using infantry out here again, to not very good effect. But anyway, you see a lot of the Colt 1860s used out here. And you still going to see a lot of 51 Navies, a lot of Dragoons used out in the West, because by the time that the 1860 Army comes out, it's being produced mostly for the military because the Civil War comes in. It's kind of like the Walker. Most of what's going to be out there is for military use only. And then, of course, by the time you get post-Civil War, it's all getting surplused. And so you really start to see those show up out here on the civilian market.
One thing I don't think we covered very well is the grip difference between the 51 and the 60. And if I can get up here.
They made the grip longer to replicate the Dragoon grip, and wasn't very popular at all.
Okay, so this is the 51 Navy grip, and as you can see, this is a 60 Army grip. It's much longer. Another thing is you'll see almost all 51 Navies, with the exception of a few, made in America, London, and America, have brass backstraps. There's, like I said, it's not just London that gets the steel backstraps. Colt puts them out in America too. And but almost all 1860 Armies have a steel backstrap, brass trigger guard. Most of them, anyway.
That harkens back to the Walker model.
Yeah, it's easier to make. But if there's one thing I've learned on YouTube: never say never. So somebody will find one. But anyway, I think we finally, I think we've beat that horse enough. Let's go on and see what I got here. So, of course, we're still back in 1860. War hasn't even really kicked off yet. And, of course, that is called the new holster model. But what are we going to do, Duke, about the old belt model?
Call it the old belt model.
We're going to replace it.
Right, they're going to start redesigning. So the 1860s is the first of what they call the new line model. It's got a rounded barrel. It's got a creeping loading lever. So what do you do in 1861? Well, you take your older models and you start revamping them out. So yeah, in 1861, you get the 61 Navy, which is the 51 Navy with the new line barrel. A lot easier to produce a rounded barrel. The creeping loading lever is a lot easier to produce, more efficient for loading. Requires one screw to hold it together, whereas the 51 Navy had 2 screws to hold it together. So yeah, and if I remember right, Colt said that's one of the prettiest guns he'd ever made.
And Caleb, I happen to have 2 of them. We got the Pieta and the Uberti here, I think.
And the one thing I'll talk about on the reproductions is that Pieta was, I don't know if they still do or not, but they were making a 61 Navy reproduction. Originals were 7.5-inch barrel. I don't know why Pieta does it, but they make them with an 8-inch barrel.
Okay, so yeah, here's the difference. This is the Pieta. This is the Uberti. I'm going to hold them up cylinder to cylinder, and you can see the Pieta, is it? Pieta has the longer barrel? Yeah, Pieta has the long barrel.
Yep, 1/2 inch longer.
Which means you got to have a Pieta holster for it. But thanks to Duke, we got one of
And
those.
if I remember right, I think, yeah, all my holsters that are currently produced are made to fit an 1860 Army, so that you can fit either that or the 51 Navy to it. They both fit equally well.
So yeah, guys, if now I put these things in holsters and now I can't remember what was. Well, but anyway, yeah. 61 Navy, this is Caleb's favorite, and he has a lot of these guns and he's shot a lot. You get the best of both worlds. You're back to 36, which is awesome little round. 6 rounds, 6 shots. But we have our blade front sights, creeping loading levers, round barrels, and overall really good production of the gun. I still like the 51 Navy better just because of its history, but these are probably better shooting guns.
Yeah, and I don't think there was a lot of those produced compared to other models. In fact, they continue to produce the 1851 Navy, and it continued to be very popular even after 1861. So,
yeah. And if you guys want to know the difference in the Ubertis and Piettas, of course, the Piettas have the markings on them, but also, in my opinion, this is the Uberti spaghetti red grip, as Plowboys Ghost calls it. This is the Pietta grip. I like the Pietta grip color better.
Now, I had somebody tell me that spaghetti red grip was not historically accurate. I was looking in a book, and I don't remember the name of the book. I don't remember which one it was, but they had an original Colt single action Army that was in pristine condition, and it had a spaghetti red grip on it.
Yeah.
So apparently that was a thing.
Yeah. Another thing is the Pietta.
I like black walnut better than I like red walnut, so I stripped all mine and dyed them black.
The Pietta has a brass blade front sight, and the Uberti has a steel blade front sight.
Right.
And, I mean, they feel the same almost. The triggers. Uberti and Pietta triggers are slightly different. I mean, the Pietta, it has a sharper, kind of rounded forward trigger. This is the Pietta you see here. And the Ubertis have a
case harden their triggers.
What's that?
They also case harden their triggers where Uberti blues them.
Yeah, but I don't know which one I like better. The Uberti looks a little more refined. Let's see. Yeah, well, no. This is the Pietta. Yeah, okay. The Pietta here, Uberti here. They're just a little bit different trigger styles.
If Pietta would put their maker's mark under the barrel like Uberti does,
oh yeah,
they'd be equally good.
They would. I mean, unless you get a simmer on, just because that's usually got a little extra markings or something on it. But yeah. I mean, I don't have a lot of stories about the 61 Navy other than my brother-in-law, his great uncle actually. His name was Alexander Porter Draper, and he was for the Union, sadly, and he fought the Battle of Iuka in Missouri. He was a sergeant, and he was issued a 51 Navy that he kept. And somehow in that battle, he got a 61 Navy, and they're both still over there. They've been passed down through generations. He used them both well up into the 1900s. The 51 Navy, he had converted to 38 rimfire, and the 61 Navy still like it was. And I'm still waiting to get those out and maybe shoot them someday on the channel here. I'd love to.
Yeah, the only story I got, it's not a historical one, it's a modern one. I went into a gun store a number of years ago, and they had an original 61 Navy there. And one thing I noticed, and the reproductions, they do a lot of the steel backstrap or grip frame assembly. This one was an actual Army issue, and it was all brass. The unfortunate part of it was the guy was trying to sell it for $6,000, and if you look online, most of them go from anywhere from 2 to 3. One nice thing is it had the original military holster that was with it, in really bad condition. Of course, made in the Civil War, leather's not going to last like metal does. So good condition for the age, but yeah, it was really nice to see that. It was interesting to look at, and the Uberti reproductions, they're pretty daggone close. That's why when I bought mine, I went with the brass grip frame on it. Yeah, which mine actually right now has my 51 Navy barrel on it, so it's kind of a mismatch. But
a mismatch. I mean, there's not really a lot of history when you get into this era of cap and balls because the greats have already been made and they're still making their name. And right
Yep.
around the corner comes the next grade. You know, we all know
Right.
what that's going to be.
And the
But-
Civil War cuts out a lot of and draws a lot of the attention away from
Mhm.
everything too. So, and when you see historical accounts, when they refer to any kind of firearm, it's either gun. Sometimes they'll say a repeater. Sometimes they'll say a revolver. Quite a few times, if they know the name, they'll refer to it as a Colt revolver. Once in a while, you'll see it referred to as a Colt Navy, but
or
people
Colt
didn't
pistol.
describe. Yeah, they didn't describe their guns in great detail.
Mm-mm.
I was just reading the other night when I was sitting there at work twiddling my thumbs. It was one of the diaries that's in a book series called Covered Wagon Women. If you want to know anything about the trails in the West, Covered Wagon Women series is excellent. But the one woman was talking about, it was out just kind of planking around. She said, yeah, my husband had his Colt Navy revolver, and that's the first time I'd seen Colt Navy revolver, and that series had been listed out. So we knew. But the thing was, that's 1865. So is it a 51 Navy or is it a 61 Navy?
Who knows?
People didn't worry about that. Yeah.
You can
So you got to
sometimes
kind of interpret what it was
Yeah.
depending on what the time that record is. If they're talking about a Colt revolver in 1840 something, more than likely that's going to be a Patterson.
Yeah.
The problem with that is the deadgum editors, they'll see if they describe it as being a 5-shot revolver, they'll say, oh, well, they got that wrong because Colts are 6-shooters, so they'll change it. And it's like, no, it's not a 6-shooter. That was a 5-shooooter.
And the 49 pocket model's 5-shooter. Most of them.
Right. So there's that one misnomer because, there's one woman in 1846, Susan McGoffin talks about her husband with a 6-shooter. The only thing would be as if he had an Allen pepper box. But she talks about him cleaning the 6-shooter, and it's like, no, that's and if I remember right, she calls it a Colt, so it was a 5-shooter.
Yeah.
That would have been a Patterson because it's too early for the Walker, and the Walker wouldn't have been in civilian hands in 46. So yeah.
I'll give everybody a look again. This is the 61 Navy. I was just thinking about that. There's a record of a man shooting 11 guys that tried to jump him with 2 Colt pistols in 1855 in California, and I can't think of his name right now, but it was an awesome story because he killed 11 guys, and the one guy that was left died later. He cut up like 4 of them with a Bowie knife and killed the rest with his pistols. It's 1855, and they say he drew his Colt revolvers, so you got to do a little deduction. This guy was at one point a Texas Ranger, so it could have been Walker's, but I doubt it. I don't think it was Patterson's because he definitely had at least 12 shots.
Right.
And the thing that tells me is he shot these guys and killed almost all of them with a single shot, so probably not a 49 pocket model. And all I can figure is they said he drew the revolvers off his body in 1855. I'm going to safely assume those were 51 Navies.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing you got to think about is that most of the Dragoons are being purchased and gone through the military. There are a few Dragoons. There are a few accounts of them being on the civilian market. Not a lot. And then you got to look at, the 51 Navy was highly produced. The 49 pocket was highly produced. The Dragoons, there's not nearly as many of those being produced. And like I said, most of those are going to the military. So, yeah, from that you can deduce he's probably carrying 51 Navies.
Yeah. And Dragoons, of course, had a 10-year less run than everything else because they were outclassed in 60 by the Army. But anyway, so that was the 61 Navies. And Colt still had one more trick up his sleeve, if I can find it. And here we finally made it to the 1862 Pocket Police. Half-fluted cylinders. Other than that, this is a 36 built on the 49 pocket model frame. Once again, cutting a water table and belting or rebating, however you want to call it, the cylinder. We have the creeping loading lever back to a bead front sight again, which is kind of amazing to me. And back to brass on the back strap on all the ones I've seen pictures of. It's cheaper that way, I guess.
One other one that comes out at that same time, and that is the Pocket Navy, and that has an octagon barrel.
And that is the only difference, I think?
Then the cylinder's not fluted.
Is it a 6-shot 36 too?
No, it's 5.
It's 5, just like this. Okay, this is 5. That's 5. So it's just octagon barrel is the only difference.
Yeah,
and I
basically, It's the flutes and the octagon barrel. That's the difference. Is that the pocket navy is not fluted.
And this is the 49 Pocket Police, which was actually used by police. According to the Baltimore Police Department, armed with 49 pocket models. This is a 62. Sorry, 62 to Pocket Police, and they upgraded to this. I said 49 Pocket Police. Let's not add any more 49s. There's already enough 49s out there as there it is.
And if I remember right, there's a story in Colorado of a cannibal. I can't remember his name. Alfred Packer.
Packer, yeah.
Yeah, Alfred Packer. And I don't remember if it was a 51 Navy or a 62 Pocket Police. I just know it was a naval caliber 36. I think it was the 62 Pocket. And anyway, yeah. So Alfred Packer, they get caught up in the mountains, him and his compadres, and he winds up eating them. And then he winds up going to trial over it. And they said, well, did he kill him to eat him, or did he kill him and then eat him afterwards? Packer claims that he killed the man in self-defense, but was starving, so he ate him. And I don't remember. I think they found him guilty and hung him.
Yeah.
Well, years later, and I'm talking like very recently, they were going in and kind of investigating and come to determine that Packer's story was the truth. The man tried to kill Packer. Packer shot him in self-defense, and then afterwards ate him. So,
that's
kind
what
of like
that
the
is.
Donner Party. Wasn't that he killed him to eat him; it was killed him, and then he was in desperate need of food. So, yeah.
Yep.
In fact, I need to look that up because I think they did hang him for that. I got to double check here.
The thing about this 62 Pocket Police, there's not a lot of historical provenance with it, other than the fact that this is the last design that Samuel Colt put his hands on. This comes out in early 62. He dies, I believe, in summer of 62 of, you want to call it syphilis, you want to call it gout complications. You can go either direction. But this is the last thing that came out of the mind of that genius. And in reality, this is the last true innovation that Colt really does. I mean, of course, the 72, right. I mean, you get the 73, but the 73 is just building on innovations that he's already put out with the top strap on the 55, the grip of the 51 Navy, the half fluted cylinder of the 62. It's from now on, people are just going to take, until Browning comes along, people are just going to take his designs and tweak them and turn them around and keep constantly changing them. And that is what, in my opinion, has killed Colt in the 20th century. They got to a point where they just quit innovating. Samuel Colt innovated once at least every 5 years and turned the world upside down every single time. Colt started making the 1911, made a few double action, you get your Pythons and your Anacondas and all that and the great guns like that. And then they don't innovate again until Stoner comes along with the M16, the AR-15. Right. And that was the last innovation they make, and now they're owned by CZ.
And the thing with the Colt company is, and this is my personal opinion, the reason they failed today is because they fell back into the same errors that Samuel Colt had made when he was at the Patterson factory.
Not looking for a civilian market.
Right. They were relying entirely on military contract and not paying attention to the civilian market. And really, that's going to be a killer because you can't always guarantee that you're going to win a government contract. And, I've been told this, and I've heard different stories from whoever you talk to, but I was in a gun store. The first Uberti 73 single action I bought, I was at a gun store, and they had a Colt there. They had an actual Colt. It was $2,000, and they had the Uberti for, I think I was labeled $400. And so I was talking with a guy there, and I said, so how does Uberti compare? I said, is it really worth the extra $1,600 to buy a Colt, or is Uberti just as good? And he says, ever since Colt got the contract for government guns, thanks to being in Iraq and Afghanistan, they said they pretty much contracted out to Uberti. And so this gun is actually all Uberti parts that they send to the Colt, and the Colt custom shop puts them together. So that's why I wound up buying the Uberti, and I didn't spend the extra $1,600, which is probably a good thing because, I wouldn't have been able to stay in college that semester. But Yeah. So they were contracting it out. Of course, Colt's done that before. He did it when he produced the Walker. Very little of the Walker items were made at the Walker factory. They were produced elsewhere and then brought in and assembled at the Whitneyville factory. So, Colt just, they pulled the same mistakes over and over again. They were relying too heavily on government contracts.
And not having anybody to innovate, always constantly looking to the past, never looking
right.
forward.
And, Colt, he had a lot of good innovations. The 73 single action was a good innovation. They kind of were hit and miss with the double actions, but, when John Browning come in, that's when they get the 1911.
And the 1903 and all those leading up to it. And that was a burst of innovation. Stoner was a burst of innovation, and that's it.
Credit they tried to expand outside of the handgun world because you see them make double barrels. The Cimarron double barrel shotgun that they offer now is a copy of the 78 Colt double barrel. They tried the Burgess rifle.
The Lightning pump action rifle.
The Lightning pump action, which I think that was a great design. It just wasn't as popular as others, but I thought it was a good design. And then, you get to the 1911, and things kind of die off, and they play around a little more with the double actions. And like you said, till the M16, I mean,
they went almost 100 years.
Outside source.
Almost 100 years with only 2 innovations. Whereas when Sam Colt was running the thing, we had an innovation every 4 to 5 years at least. Something was keeping the market moving. Something was always being new. And I'm not saying you can constantly do that, but he did a good job at that. So anyway,
Colt
guys,
was definitely business minded. He definitely was.
Yeah.
And I think he was just, when he started at the Patterson factory, he just didn't have enough experience with it to get going. But by the time that 47 come around, he was ready to get into that business, and he did very well.
And he did always innovating.
And then there's the Colt made Gatling guns. There were some of those that were around. The Bulldog, I think is what they called it.
I have not studied that at all. I'd be interested.
Yeah. So I was watching, I think it's Kaido Ojama. He did a video on his channel. He went out to the Historical Society for Connecticut, and they had a Colt-made Gatling gun there on display, which biggest revolver Colt ever made.
Exactly. Oh, well, guys, we're getting down to it. We're going to run to 3 hours and 30 minutes. We're at 3 hours and 27 minutes now, so we got a few more minutes here. I'm going to read a few of these last comments. We've kept a pretty good crowd between 13 and 17 in here most of the evening. West Covina Dodge.
That number might be a little bit low because it doesn't always show up. If people got their subscriber or their watch thing set to private, they won't show up on there. So
yeah. West Covina Dodge needs a need to run. If you're still on in an hour or so, I'll see you then. That was at 11. What time is it?
11 o'clock for me, so it's got to be midnight for you.
Midnight for me, man. I've ran till midnight. That's weird. That was back at 11:24, so no, it's been not on. But anyway, he said, and Brass said 1870 gasser loaded with full carbine cartridges might be the most powerful revolver back then. I would agree with you, with the exception of maybe the Adams, but they're both more powerful than the Walker. I'm sorry to say. Anyway. He said, anyone see the Civil War Centennial 22 short faux revolvers made by Colt? The barrel is 100% zinc, no liner. I've seen them in boxes. I've seen them at auctions. I've never been interested in buying one. They're always too expensive.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to shoot a zinc barrel anyway.
Yeah, and they can run more than a single action army. Colt leadership not too long ago said they'd never make a 9mm pistol again. Well, see where that gets them. Which I'm not too into 9mm myself, but you got to move. If you want to keep the old stuff going, you got to have something modern to supplement it. He said Colt was buying Spanish 25 and 380 pistols, putting their name on it. That's possible. Anyway, guys, all right, we're about there. In 3.5 hours, we have gone from this to this and decently covered every cap and ball Colt that was made. And I am impressed with us for that because I didn't think we'd get this far. But, man, it was a lot of fun. I appreciate you coming on, Duke. Tell everybody one more time where you can be found and where you can get holsters at.
Duke Fraizer Productions at gmail.com is how you order holsters. I've also got a Facebook page. It's not my personal page. It's the Duke Fraizer Productions Facebook page. You can order through there. I try to keep it down to the email and that so that it's easier to keep track of the orders, because right now I've got, oh, God, they're scattered all over. I'm going to have a heck of a time when I get these done, finding out who goes where. Yeah, if you want to know how to spell it, just go over to my channel, which is Duke Fraizer Productions, and it's the title @gmail.com. And if you want Christmas orders, you're going to have to wait till next Christmas before you get them for that, because I'm booked up.
Yeah.
Yeah, get your orders in. I got a batch I'm trying to get done now. So here in the next couple weeks, I should be ready to really start rolling out again. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it doesn't take me 2 weeks to finish what I got. Yeah. And then, we left off on a good spot, and, leaves us in a perfect spot to start off on the next one with the cartridge era.
Yeah, I think we're going to take a few months to study that far, because I'm not studied up too well on all the cartridge era. I don't know if you are. But,
I know a little bit to be dangerous.
Got to get into these bad boys.
Yeah, now those ones, that's one where I started. I'm pretty good from the transition or the conversions up through the 73. And then after that, I kind of quit paying attention until the 1911. So,
1903.
Is that 32 ACP?
Yeah. I think next time we'll make it a little easier on ourselves, and we'll cover from the 62 through the conversions up to the 73, and maybe do a part 3 eventually from 73 to 1911. How's that sound?
That sounds good. What do you think? Maybe do the part 2 next month or something?
Yeah, I'd say give me a month.
Okay.
Anyway, everybody, trust in God and keep your powder dry. We're going to shut this down. I want to show you something here if I can move my camera. And that ain't all. They're on the desk too. But anyway, thanks for staying with us this long, guys. Bye.
Have a good one.